My grandma died when I was little. I don't remember much about her apart from the vaguest memories. She always wore flowery dresses, and she always fed me treats when my mother wasn't looking. My grandpa never remarried. My mother always said it was because he loved his wife so much that nobody would be able to take her place. When I got older, I found this both heartbreaking and romantic. Grandma had had her own room. Grandpa said it was because he snored so much they had to sleep separately. When she died, he locked her room up, and it was the only place in the house we were not permitted to go. Sometimes we would try to peep through the keyhole, but someone would always scream about seeing a ghost, and we would all run away. I don't think Grandpa was lonely. We were a big part of his life. He lived close by, so we all piled into his house regularly, filling his house with noise and life. I would play in his garden with my cousins, whilst the adults talked and cooked. In the summer, the garden bloomed with the flowers my grandma had loved, hydrangeas being her favorite. In the winter, it was hung with balls of fat and birdseed, and the bird feeder was always fully stocked. My grandma had loved birds, Grandpa said, and always worried that they wouldn't have enough to eat when the weather got colder. I was, unofficially, my grandpa's favorite. He would bounce me on his knee and sing a song about my name that I didn't understand but thought was hilarious. Willie the Pink. I took to wearing pink whenever I visited. He took over my grandma's job of handing out treats to all of us, cautioning us not to tell our parents, although I'm sure our parents knew full well what was going on from the telltale smears of chocolate around our mouths. He was a gentle, mild man who hardly ever raised his voice. The only time I can ever remember him being slightly angry is when my brother Craig and I were fighting. Craig had kicked me in the leg hard enough to leave the print of his shoe sole on me, and Grandpa had almost shouted then. Unused to Grandpa scolding us, Craig had started to cry, and Grandpa had taken him aside and given him a long, serious talk about the importance of family. You never hurt family. He had told him, your family is important. Craig always treated me pretty well after that. When Grandpa grew frail, he needed more help. As his favorite, it naturally fell to me to take on part of his care. I shared my duties with the home care, although they weren't really duties as I loved him so much. I would have done anything for Grandpa. His mind remained mostly sharp, with occasional lapses that he referred to as senior moments. Sometimes he would call me by my mother's name, but he would always correct himself. When he became seriously ill, I quit my job to be his full-time carer. Being put in a nursing home was Grandpa's biggest fear, and he made me promise over and over again that I wouldn't allow that to happen. I can't leave her, he said. She's still here. We said till death do us part, and I'm not dead yet. Even as an adult, I was not allowed into her room. He told me he had kept it exactly the same as the day she had died, a shrine to her memory. He got weak. He couldn't eat unless I spoon-fed him. The nurse who visited every day fitted him with a catheter and told me he should really be in a hospice, but I ignored her. If he wanted to die at home, I would honor my promise to let him do so. He liked to talk to me. He reminisced about the day he had met my grandma, the day each grandchild was born. He loved having so many grandchildren. He told me he loved to see us thrive, and mourned the fact that he wouldn't live to see his great-grandchildren. My eldest cousin was pregnant, but it was doubtful he would be alive by the time she gave birth. He never got sad. He had lived a very full life, and a happy one, but he did get anxious, although he said he wasn't afraid to die. He said it was what might come after that worried him. He spent his last days barely aware of what was going on around him. Family visited, staying as long as they could, and sometimes his small, modest room was packed with people spilling from the doorway. The kettle was never cold, the house never empty, except for the night he finally died. I was with him, along with my mother and aunt. They had fallen asleep in their chairs, their gentle snores the only sound in the room besides the ticking of Grandpa's old clock and the slow, labored breaths of my grandpa. He regained consciousness briefly before he died, and though I might have woken my mother and aunt so they could share, some selfish instinct stopped me from doing so. I knew, you see, and I wanted this moment to be my own. His eyes were bleary, but they managed to focus on me. His cheeks twitched as he tried to muster a smile. Willie the Pink, he whispered. I whispered back, yes, it's me. I'm sorry, he said. I took the gnarled hand that lay on the covers. His fingers were cold. "You don't have to apologize, Grandpa." I told him I wanted to cry, but he had always hated to see me cry. "Yes, I do." He sank back on his pillow, the exchange clearly exhausting him. "I'm sorry for what comes after," he said. "You never hurt family. Family is important." He died then, and that was when I allowed myself to cry. I would miss him, but I couldn't be sad for him. He was going to see Grandma after all these years. I imagined him strong again, walking into a white light, and emerging on the other side to a garden where flowers always bloomed and the birds were always singing, my grandma waiting at the end of the path. As with his care, it fell mostly to me to clear out his house. I had help on the evenings and weekends, but most of the time it was just me. His room was the hardest for me to do, and I cried often as I worked. It would have been poetic if the clock in his room had stopped ticking when he died, but it continued to tick in defiance of my wishes, a constant background to my chore. I boxed everything up, sealing and labeling my grandpa's life. Everything he had experienced was being compartmentalized into what was of value and what was not. The richness and experience of his life had been reduced to odds and ends to be sorted to put away. I sorted things for charity, heirlooms to be shared out amongst the rest of the family, memories to be stored away in an attic. Everything I picked up had some kind of significance, whether it was the everyday detritus of his life or the mementos of his history, a pen he would never write with again, a book he hadn't finished reading. These things were just as poignant as his medals and his photographs. There were old love letters from my grandma, souvenirs from holidays, pictures we had painted for him, birthday cards we had sent, and finally, in the depths of an old, dented tobacco tin, buried beneath old cinema ticket stubs and faded postcards, the key to my grandma's room. It felt almost sacrilegious to go in there after all these years, yet the morbid fascination with Grandma's room had stayed with me since I was a child, and I couldn't have kept out even if I hadn't had a job to do. From the way Grandpa had spoken about her presence in the house, I almost expected to open the door and find her there, either as a desiccated corpse stretched out on the bed or as a taxidermized mummy propped up in a chair. She wasn't, of course. The room was empty of life and death, and had been for decades. It smelled stale in there, as was to be expected, and slightly sweet with an old scent that might have been violets and might have been roses. It was a very feminine room. The wallpaper bore the same floral motif she had favored on her dresses. Grandpa had kept the curtains closed, so it hadn't faded, apart from a narrow stripe from a persistent sunbeam that angled towards the narrow bed. My first thought as I walked in was that it felt like a stage set, as if every item in the room was a prop. Had she died in here? I couldn't remember what I had been told. I found myself looking for signs of her passing, a life interrupted on the spot. As with my grandpa's room, I didn't know where to start, but this time it was because everything was so familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time. There were memories to be found here, as buried as the key to her room had been. The first thing I did was to pull open the curtains. With some natural light in there, everything felt a little more real, and I was able to look around without the feeling of dissociation I'd felt upon entering. I couldn't tackle her room that day. It was too soon. I wanted the chance to remember more, to explore, and to reconnect with the woman who had sat me on her knee. How could I discover this unknown life and collapse it all in the same day? Even though she had died long ago, it still felt like prying to go through her personal items. I sifted through her belongings with less sentimentality, but more curiosity than I had with my grandpa's room. A beloved life was stored within these walls, but one I had barely any memory of, so whilst everything I picked up had a story behind it, I did not know what it was. There was a pegboard on one wall with baby booties hung on it. I counted them, and they matched the number of grandchildren in the family. Grandma had, apparently, kept a pair from each of us. We were represented two in framed photos, both on the wall and on her dressing table, alongside perfume bottles from which the contents had long since evaporated, and old cosmetics with faded labels. There was also a jewelry box on her dressing table that drew my attention. Mother of pearl was inlaid on the lid, and it was cracked open, with a string of amber beads spilling out. That jewelry box summoned a stubborn memory of sitting on the knee of a woman who wore flowers and smelled like flowers, and sifting through the contents. The jewelry inside was all cheap stuff, but it was colorful and sparkling, something that would have fascinated younger me. I was allowed to choose anything, she said, any piece I wanted. There was a butterfly brooch that I suddenly recalled pinned to her dress, right in the center of a printed flower as though it had landed there to drink nectar. I had a whole box of cut price finery to choose from, but for some reason that brooch stood out. "You want this? Are you sure?" I saw a hand unpinning the brooch and carefully tucking the point away before it was handed to me. It was made from enamel with colored glass and expertly mounted on the wings. A bit of pretty rubbish really, but it was the only thing I wanted. Whatever had happened to that brooch? I drifted through her room slowly, examining everything until the sky began to darken. The room had felt tranquil, whilst the sunlight had flooded it, but as the shadows began to grow I started to feel unsettled. As a child I had been afraid of the dark. Maybe those feelings were resurfacing, because I had been a child the last time I was in here. Whatever the reason, I left the room and locked the door back up again. I didn't sleep well that night. I woke often, plagued by nightmares, and was unable to settle again until I gave in to my old fears and turned on a lamp. In one dream, I was unlocking the door to Grandma's room and there was a scuffing sound from within. I opened the door just in time to see something crawl under the bed. It was dragging a pair of malformed, not quite human feet behind it. In another, I was trying to open the wardrobe door but I couldn't. It didn't feel as though the door was locked, but more like someone was holding it closed from the inside. When I did finally open it, my first action was to plunge my hand in between the hanging dresses. I felt something cold and papery and lumpy that might have been a face. It split open in the seconds before I woke, and I felt teeth against my fingertips. The final dream had Grandpa in it. He looked as he did the moment before he died, but he was standing in front of Grandma's door, barring the way. He was unresponsive, his face blank and inanimate, eyes lifeless. I could not bring myself to move him. My nightmares lingered the next day, and it was hard for me to unlock the door to Grandma's room. There was a feeling of foreboding quite aside from the normal trepidation I'd felt the first time. I heard no noises, saw no horrible creature scrabble beneath her bed, and, as I'd left the curtains open the day before, sunlight dispelled any shadows. It was a pleasant room, and I relaxed once I was inside. Dreams were my mind's way of sorting through information, and I couldn't let them affect me. I started my work slowly, emptying Grandma's wardrobe one dress at a time. I folded each one with reverence. Even though I remembered little of her, she deserved as much respect as Grandpa had. There were fur coats wrapped in plastic, and I didn't know what to do with them. I went through the pockets of each before putting them in a separate box. I found a handkerchief in one, a spent lipstick tube, and an old penny in another. She had many handbags too, and I found more outdated currency in there. In a small, sequin evening bag I found a tiny key, and set it aside in case I found what it belonged to. Around lunchtime, some family members came by to help. For whatever reason, I found myself locking up Grandma's room and pocketing the key, unwilling to let them into our secret. And it did feel like a secret. We moved boxes and loaded cars together, but all the while I was wishing they would leave so I could carry on my exploration. I slept in the narrow bed in the little room I'd adopted since Grandpa had become ill. I hadn't slept easy since I'd ventured into Grandma's room, though I had always slept well before. I had black nightmares, full of terror and confusion that would wake me up in a sweating mess. I started to sleepwalk, something I hadn't done since I was a child. I often woke up trying to turn the handle to my Grandma's room, and would run back to my own bed in childish terror. When I woke up, I would wash and dress and eat breakfast, then go back into her room as if those dreams had never happened. I cleared her room slowly and painstakingly. I was looking for the tawdry butterfly brooch that Grandma had once given me, on the off chance it had found its way back to her room. It had a familiar yet uncomfortable association that wouldn't leave me alone. I dreamed about that brooch. It had been a bad dream, but much more innocent than the others. I dreamed about wearing the brooch on my t-shirt and someone unpinning it. Grandpa had been the one to unpin it. He had seen me wearing it, and his face had clouded for a second, something dark behind his eyes. "Did your grandma give you that?" I felt scared. I thought he was accusing me of stealing it, and I started to cry. He picked me up, kissed my forehead, and patted my back, but he took the brooch off me nevertheless. I felt terrible in the dream, as though I disappointed him, and I never wanted to disappoint Grandpa. He laughed and squeezed me tight, called me a silly sausage, told me I hadn't done anything wrong, but it didn't help. I had evidently done something wrong. It was right there on his face. There were raised voices. I was alone. I stood outside a closed door, listening, the doorknob far above my head. What had I done, and why was Grandpa angry? I left Grandma's jewelry box till last. Everything else had been labeled and packed, but I hadn't been able to put that away yet. I'd been half hoping the butterfly brooch would suddenly appear in there if I looked often enough. I don't know why I wanted it so much. Maybe just to validate my memory. I packed the jewelry box with the rest of the heirlooms. I was exhausted. I wanted nothing more to do with my grandma's room. It was stripped bare, aside from the large items of furniture, and the British Heart Foundation were coming tomorrow to take those away. I was done. We don't take mattresses. I was haggard from lack of sleep, and as far as I was concerned, the man could have been speaking a foreign language. He must have seen my confusion, because he elaborated. We'll take the bed frame, but you'll have to dispose of the mattress yourself. Not hygienic. People won't buy a used mattress. I shrugged. Okay, take the rest then. I'll deal with what's left. He nodded. I turned aside and went to my little room with its narrow bed. I had no wish to see these strangers tramping through my grandpa's home, stripping it of everything I had ever known, peeling it back to an ordinary house. I heard the men bantering as they moved the furniture, laughing amongst themselves, talking about what they'd watched on TV the night before. They didn't mean any harm, but their levity was grating. It was only when it came to moving Grandma's old bed frame that the chatter stopped. A man came to my room and knocked on my door. Excuse me, there's something you missed when you were clearing out. Some kind of box. I thought you might want it. I opened the door. The man held a large wooden box, inset with a tiny brass keyhole. It looked expensive, almost definitely an antique, and I admired his honesty. It was under the bed in the flowery room. He said, couldn't see it unless you crawled under there, to be honest. Looks important though. I thanked him in earnest, thinking about his words as I closed the door on the clamor that had restarted. It had been under my grandma's bed, and I couldn't have seen it unless I'd crawled under. Of course, my mind returned to my dreams, and the thing which had scuttled under my grandma's bed, but it also returned to a tiny key I recalled finding in a pocket, a handbag. What had I done with that? The men had been forbidden to take any box marked with an X, and after they had gone I ventured out and began to search. It was in one of the boxes, I was sure. I dug through each one as efficiently as I could, taking care not to disrupt the order I had created. There were countless odd receptacles in each box, any one of them possibly containing the key to the polished wooden box in my room. But twilight reached me before I found my prize, and I ate a solemn, solo dinner before retiring for the night. I read a book on a mattress on the floor of my room, by the light of a bare bulb, before finally falling asleep. The dream I had that night was just as disturbing as all the others, if not more. In it, I was searching the house for the key still, rummaging through boxes upon boxes, but in each one all I found was knitted baby booties, filled to the brim. Every box I emptied made my anxiety grow, but I persevered, piling the booties in a corner of my grandma's room until they nearly reached the ceiling. Just before I woke up, I found myself spiraling through the bare rooms, frantic at all the empty boxes, but there was one in my grandpa's room I hadn't opened. This was probably due to the figure crouched beside it, a hunched over thing that might have been an item of furniture, but which I somehow knew it was not. And although I very much wanted to look in that final box, I didn't want to go near its apparent guardian. When I woke up, Grandpa's room was the first place I went. It was full of boxes waiting to be distributed amongst the family, but there was one in the corner I recognized from my dream. There was no hunched figure crouched beside it, but I still felt uneasy when I approached. This box was labeled with a question mark, which was what I put on anything that wasn't immediately identifiable, and I started to sift through the contents. It was the work of a few minutes to find the tiny key, which I had sealed into an envelope marked keys. I had labeled so many things whilst clearing the house it was no wonder I didn't quite recall labeling this one. I took the key back to my room and unlocked the box. There was no ceremony to it. I might have been about to uncover a deeply hidden family secret, but there was no thunder and lightning to accompany my discovery. The box was full of newspaper, yellowed and fragile with age. It wasn't preserved for any historical reason, as it was all crumpled up, not folded. It looked more like it was there to serve as packing material. I dug down into the box, pulling out the newspaper. I was expecting documents, or photos, or an old diary entry or two, but it won't surprise you much that I discovered an old brooch nestled in the bottom. I found I wasn't surprised either. Part of me had expected it. What I hadn't expected, however, was that the brooch did not depict a butterfly, as I remembered. It was vaguely butterfly-shaped, with wings, and the color scheme was familiar enough that I recognized it. But whatever creature it had been created to resemble was not anything I had seen in nature. It was just as garish and crude as I remembered, but the clumsiness of its design seemed deliberate rather than due to lack of skill. Despite being a physical object, the lines blurred together in an odd optical illusion so that no matter how much I stared at it, it never quite came into focus and seemed to change whenever I turned it. I put the brooch in my pocket. Family members would be arriving soon to move boxes, and I didn't want them to see the brooch. Also, looking at it gave me a curiously queasy feeling, as though I were about to get a migraine. We worked all day. At the end of it, the house was empty but for my belongings and my mattress, and my mother asked if I would be going home. She had assumed I would, but I did not want to. I felt like there was unfinished business here. One more night, I was so tired I fell asleep without difficulty. I had looked at the brooch again before turning out the light, but couldn't make any more sense of it. I left it on the narrow ledge of the windowsill next to me and drifted back into the familiar realm of my troubled dreams. You want this? Are you sure? I was little again, sat on Grandma's lap. The jewelry box was open on my own lap, forgotten. The brooch on her dress was far more fascinating. I had remembered this part, but there was more that I hadn't, and it rolled out obligingly for me now. Choose something else, darling, said Grandma. This is for grown-ups. I want that. My tears have been easy. I wasn't used to Grandma telling me no. Please, Willie, anything else, anything you want. There had been more arguing, but I had been an expert manipulator as a child, and I could sense Grandma's resolve weakening. I sulked and pouted and begged and cried until she caved in. But even then there was hesitation as she unpinned the brooch. You could have chosen anything, she said, but here, it's yours. I clutched it in my fist, gazing with fascination at the funny face the thing had. Butterfly, yes, butterfly, pretty butterfly. Come on now, Lily, would you like a cake? Grandma has baked some. My mother, looking horrified when I showed her. Oh my God, Mum, why has she got that monstrosity? Lily, give it back, it's ugly. But I would not give it back. It was mine. I had won it through determination. My grandmother hung her head. She wanted it, she said. Grandpa spotted it next. He looked angry. I thought he was angry at me for nagging Grandma, but he was kind to me. Unpinned the brooch, took it away. I followed him discreetly and listened at Grandma's bedroom door as they argued within, the doorknob far above my head. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out the odd word. You don't hurt family, Grandpa was saying. Hilda, I love you, but not Lily. She's a child. We said no children, and not family, more indistinct words. It sounded like my grandmother was crying. I'm so tired. She asked for it. She begged. I put my cheek against the door to listen closer. Clumsy little kid's skull bonking off the wood, and the voices inside stopped abruptly. Did you hear that? I didn't wait to see if either of them had. I ran away into the garden to play with my cousins. I remembered all of it now, but still none of it made sense. I think I was awake. I could feel the pillow beneath my head, the covers on top of me. There was even a tickle in my nose that had been a constant companion since starting all the dusty work I had done. I had to be awake, but my bedroom door was open when I knew I had closed it. From where I was lying, I had a clear view down the hall. Nearest, and to the left was Grandma's room, then Grandpa's room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right the stairs. There was a broad stripe of moonlight cutting across the banister from the small window by the stairs, and it hit Grandma's bedroom door with unnerving accuracy. I had shut her door and locked it, a ritual I never neglected, and I was glad I had, because in the depths of the customary nighttime silence I thought I heard the creak of boards in her room. I closed my eyes, tried to go back to sleep. There might have been the merest judder of the floor beneath my mattress, transferred from the long boards that made up the top floor of the house, but that was likely just my imagination. I listened to my own breathing. It was loud inside my head, and very nearly blotted out the noise which was becoming more noticeable the more I ignored it. A dragging sound, the sound of something that wanted to be heard but was pretending it didn't. A crafty noise, a snickering under the breath, slow and laborious, and getting closer. I thought of old childhood songs, hymns I had sung when I was little inside a large echoing room where we had assembly. We'd been taught kiddie Christian songs about Jesus being a light and how autumn reminded us of God. I tried to remember the words, anything rather than acknowledge what I was hearing. It was louder now, more insistent. It sounded like the door handle to Grandma's room was rattling. I didn't open my eyes because I didn't want to see if I was right. And anyway, the door was locked. No point in ruining my sleep and seeing something upsetting but harmless. Autumn days, when the grass is jeweled and the silk inside a chestnut shell. Jet planes waiting in the air to be refueled. All these things I love so well. So I mustn't forget, to say a great big thank you. I mustn't forget. The next verse had mentioned bacon. I was sure of it. The smell of bacon. I didn't want to hear what I heard. The door I had locked opening with a scream of complaining hinges that almost sounded human. The thud of something soft hitting the floor. I opened my eyes then. It was a mistake. There was a fat shadow outside Grandma's room. Part of it obscured by the doorway. It had no real form, but it undulated where it lay, hunching up into a rounder shape. It reminded me of a cocoon, as if something was struggling inside to get out. A thin outer membrane bulging from within. It pulled itself from the doorway, and now I had seen it, I was powerless to look away. I couldn't even close my eyes. I saw all of it, in whatever form it chose to show. The end of it tapered into something that could have been legs, although they tapered into points that in no way resembled feet. There were small nubs there, but they waved in the air uselessly as it shuffled along on bent, sharply angular joints that might have been knees. It started to pull itself along the bare boards, unsheathing claws from the folds of itself, digging them into the wood and dragging its body forward. Scrape by scrape, it was coming towards me. Was this sleep paralysis? It made sense. I'd heard all about it, and it certainly fit the description. I couldn't move, and I was seeing something that couldn't possibly have been there. As it got closer, I could hear the raspy sounds of its breath. It was damp and bubbly, choked and phlegmy. It sounded like it was drowning, and I wished it would do so before it reached me. A face was becoming visible under the cowl of skin or cloth hanging over the front of the thing, but I had no wish to see it. It crawled with steady menace, broaching the threshold of my room and not stopping till it was within touching distance. I could not close my eyes, but I willed them to unfocus. There were tiny muscles I was still able to command, and I used them, blurring the face getting close to mine, letting my gaze drift. It smelled like mold and old spunk and wet dust. If cobwebs had a smell we could detect, they would smell like this, I thought. A scaly hand touched my arm, scrabbled across my chest. It had a weight that belied its skeletal appearance. It used the hand to heave itself on top of me, and I let my eyes roll back into my head. I did not want to see its face. I felt its bulk settle against my ribs, a pressure like a cement block crushing my lungs. It was panting now, breath that should have been hot but was icy cold stinging the skin of my face. I thought about the smell of bacon as it fastened its lipless mouth over mine and started to suck. I must have passed out, or fallen asleep, or switched to another dream. I don't quite know which reality was true. I was dazed and lightheaded when I came to myself, sucking in air with a pair of lungs that felt flat and rubbery and stupid. I couldn't take a deep enough breath to satisfy me. The thing was gone, if it had ever been there, but in its place I felt a gentle pressure near my feet that was enough to make me crane my head towards it. There was a man sitting on my mattress, legs folded awkwardly, but I felt no fear. I recognized my grandpa from photos in which he was younger. He looked very sad. "I'm sorry, Lily," he told me. I tried to get rid of it, but she wouldn't let me. I wanted to hide it better, but I didn't know I was going to get ill so quickly. I tried to sit up, but I was so weak my arms collapsed underneath me. I heard Grandpa click his tongue in sympathy. "Poor girl," he said. "It's not pleasant, I know." She told me all about it. Decades, it followed her. Sometimes she could get rid of it for years, other times only days. Wore her out. He patted my leg. I could feel it through my blanket. "She never meant to pass it to you. We had an agreement, no kids, no family." She swore, but she got tired. He leaned over, and I managed to raise my head enough to see him. His eyes were wet, but whilst they offered empathy, there was no real help there. "I can't stay long. They'll notice I'm gone." But get yourself some oxygen. You'll need it in the mornings. Take a sip or two when you wake up. It's yours now, so take it as much as you can. Pass it on if you feel you're able. You probably won't feel like you can now, but a few years down the line you might change your mind. It weighs on the soul, she said. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask him so much more, but I didn't have the energy, and he was looking scared now. I have to go. They're looking for me. I'm so sorry, Angel. Just remember what I said. His emblem guides him. He has to follow, but he always returns once the soul has gone. Sleep right, Lily the Pink. He left then, left in an unimpressive fizzle of air occupying the space where he had been, and I was alone with a new dilemma. So far, I have decided that I will take the creature for as long as I can. After that, who knows? Somebody has to own it. It's been a year since my grandfather died, a year in which I have known more weariness and terror than the rest of the years of my life combined. It took me far too long to take my dead grandfather's advice and get myself some oxygen. I didn't want to go to a doctor as I knew they would not find the cause of my condition, and I stupidly thought I would be unable to simply buy oxygen without a doctor's referral. But after several months and considerable fatigue, my desperation drove me to a website where I bought a few cylinders with no questions asked. It seems nobody cares if you buy oxygen. It did help, in a way, but it helped the same way as drying your hands on a damp towel is better than no towel at all. Anyway, I feel like I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the morning after my first visitation. I might have thought it was a vivid, bad dream. Despite my exhaustion, there was a single, frameless mirror left in the house, screwed in above the bathroom wash basin, and I dragged myself there with limbs that felt heavy and clumsy. There were black circles beneath my eyes that hadn't been there the day before, and fine lines around my mouth that were also a new addition. I regarded myself for some time, trying to process what I was seeing and make some kind of sense of it, but my mind was as sluggish as my body. Every breath was an effort, every thought vague and hard fought for. I eventually dragged myself back to my mattress and slept for another 5 hours, and by the end of that substantial nap I was only marginally more refreshed than before. I did not wake naturally. I was woken by my phone ringing next to my head, vibrating on the bare boards, and it hadn't been the first phone call. I had slept through 4 others, according to my missed calls log. My mother was on the other end, frantic and anxious. She had no suspicion of what I'd gone through, obviously, but she knew how close I'd been to my grandpa. And my sudden radio silence concerned her. She asked me if I was ready to come home. She had to repeat the question several times before I understood what she was asking, but once it had penetrated the flabby mush that was my mind, I seized upon it immediately. The house where I had once felt so safe and welcome was now a landscape of half-remembered nightmares, and I wanted to go home very much. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remembered was my mother leaning over me, shaking me as gently and insistently as she could. I managed to mumble something about the flu, a very quick fabrication considering the circumstances, and let her take over. I am in my 20s, but there is something about giving up control and letting your parent take care of you even when you are an adult that can be very comforting, depending on your relationship, of course. My mother packed my few belongings. My father took them to his car. I was ushered outside on wobbly legs, and the sound of the front door slamming shut behind me was the sweetest I'd ever heard. I was ready to be coddled and looked after, and once I was in my old room surrounded by my old plush toys and familiar furnishings, I felt something inside me uncoil. A worry I didn't know I carried was set loose, like the snipped string of a helium balloon, and I fell onto my old bed with a relief I can't describe. I slept some more. I couldn't get enough sleep, it seemed. When I woke, the sunlight that had been filtering through my curtains had dimmed considerably, but I could hear a TV playing somewhere in the house. An artificial light drew a rectangle around the edges of my door. I was home, and I was not alone, and I went back to sleep with no fear whatsoever. The fearlessness did not last long. When I woke again, the TV was silent and the lights were out. My room was dark, but for the yellow light of a lone street lamp shining through a gap in the curtains, I could hear my father snoring, a sound that was familiar and should have been comforting if it weren't for the other sound I could hear. It was a sly shuffling, somehow soggy and dry at the same time, accompanied by a leathery flapping that I remembered from the night before. I could not move, but this time I thankfully had enough control that I could close my eyes, and I lay waiting as the noise got louder and closer. The song that had comforted me the previous time faltered in my mind. The words were muffled and slurred, and I tried to think of another as I heard my bedroom doorknob rattle. There were a lot of jumbled thoughts going through my head as my bedroom door swung open. The main one was that I was stupid to think I could leave that thing behind just by switching location, when I could feel the ugly brooch burning against my thigh through the pocket of my jeans. I had brought the brooch with me. Stupid. I tried to relax, but the terror was just as keen as it had been before. The mere presence of the thing made my mouth dry and my eyes wet, made my heart scuffle and throb inside my ribs. My lungs were already shrinking in anticipation, knowing what was to come, and I could barely breathe at all by the time the thing was on my chest, stealing the last of the scant air I had left. It was hungry and greedy and merciless, and as I let my mind drift in the last of my consciousness, I heard its scratchy voice burrowing into my brain in a way that itched somehow. Words that weren't English or even human, but that I could almost understand anyway. I was closer to this thing than I had ever been to another person, so close I could hear its thoughts, and as much as I hated it, I almost felt a sense of completion. It loved me, this creature, loved me in a damaged and possessive way that didn't care about the destruction of everything that made me. I belonged to it, and it was glad. The knowledge that I hadn't escaped my fate preceded my waking thoughts. Before any other realization sank in, I knew I was caught up in something unfathomable, and despite my tiredness, I was prepared to do something about it. It was late morning, nearly noon, and as I stumbled into the kitchen, my father made some kind of comment about the lateness. I didn't fully comprehend his words, but I understood the tone, and understood my mother's tone when she scolded him. I was beyond caring. I managed to string together some words, it seemed, asked to go back to my grandpa's house, and managed to deflect the inevitable questions by simple incomprehension. I sat at the table and waited till my father had finished his lunch, then let myself be ushered to the car. I was wearing the same clothes I had been wearing for days, the same jeans and top. I was even in my shoes and socks. I hadn't taken anything off, and the brooch was in my pocket. I had been lying on it when I woke, and its imprint must surely have been sketched on my flesh, a perfect outline. Hideous thing. I made my father wait outside as I opened the door to my grandma's room. It was completely bare now, even the curtains gone, and dust motes drifted and swirled in the sunbeams cutting through the emptiness. Something primitive had brought me here, and I didn't even have to search for the loose board that lay where her bed would have been. I pried it up with my fingernails, mindless of the splinters piercing my flesh, and deposited the cursed brooch within the dust-choked gap I found. It nestled there, the garish colors of the glass and metal barely dimmed, and I pressed the floorboard back into place with grim satisfaction. Let someone else find it. Let the new owners deal with it. My father took me home, not asking any awkward questions, and I slept for the rest of the day whilst the world continued around me. Stupid. It follows its talisman. But the talisman is not just physical. I owned it again. I know this now. Before, my grandpa had taken it back, returned it to my grandma. I did not own it then, and when my grandma had died, who knew what had happened to the creature? It must have drifted, not owned, and owning no one, for all those years. I hope it suffered. I hope it was suffocated every night, unable to find a new victim, choked on its own helplessness. I hope it withered and failed with shriveled lungs, and gasped in agony with every labored breath. I hope it hurt every second it existed. Because when I found the brooch again, when nobody else was there to take possession of it, that's when it became mine again. It remembered me, and now I bore the same curse my grandmother had. I stayed with my parents for a few more days, until the questions my mother asked got too much for me. My father noticed my decline, of course, but said nothing, merely watching me over the kitchen table with increasing concern, and I knew that at some point he would be forced to speak up. And I could not allow that. I couldn't answer tricky questions. I knew I had to move out and find my own place, but the sludge of my weary mind struggled with the concept of searching for a new place to live. Happily or unhappily, whichever way you look at it, my problem was solved with no effort from me. It seemed that whilst most of my grandparents' belongings had been split equally between their surviving offspring, my grandpa had left me the house. It may have seemed odd or unfair to the rest of the family, but at the end of the day I had been the favorite grandchild, of course, and nobody needed much more explanation than that. But I alone knew the real reason. My parents helped me move my bed and few belongings back into my grandpa's house. They were concerned, as my health had clearly been failing recently, but didn't kick up too much of a fuss. There was a sneaking feeling that they were relieved. Not to be rid of me, but to be rid of the thing that had followed me. Whether they were consciously aware of it or not, it affected them somehow, on a very basic level. I was relieved too, in my way. I was too tired to face the questions that would come, the unwanted advice that would involve keeping hydrated and taking vitamins, and doing yoga. I wanted to languish whilst I figured out what I should do. I set up my base camp in my old room, but it wasn't ideal, even under such dire circumstances. Every night, I listened to it open my grandmother's bedroom door and make its awkward way towards where I lay. The terror never grew any less. Whether it was the 3rd time or the 300th time, I felt the same amount of fear as before. It never changed. I was a virgin sacrificed to its hunger every time, the horror just as fresh on every occasion. So I moved my bed, moved it to the very heart of activity, the source, as it were. I pushed my bed, by myself, to my grandmother's room. It took all day, with frequent stops to rest. But by the time the sun was setting, I had managed to maneuver it beneath the window, where my grandmother's bed had once been. Lying down there as sleep overtook me was the bravest thing I had ever done. I knew where the thing originated, but in the oddest way, it was also better. It took mere moments for the thing to scrabble out from under my bed and settle on my chest, whereas before I'd had to listen to it crawl and scrape its way towards me as the tension grew. As I lay numb and helpless, now it was over nearly as soon as it had begun. I would black out almost instantly when it began to feed, and wake with my lungs limp and flabby, but at least now that endless, horrifying journey had been cut short. It was the closest thing I had experienced to peace for a long time. When I could think, I tried to remember what my grandpa had said, tried to remember every overheard conversation, getting any clue I could. Once I had my oxygen to revive me in the mornings, it was slightly easier to think. I recalled the knowledge that I could pass it on, and that knowledge kept me going for a while. It was my get-out clause. I thought of people who would deserve such a curse. Bullies I went to school with, Karens from my customer service days, ex-boyfriends who didn't know what the word no meant. There are many people in the world who deserved such a fate as I had to deal with. Some boxes I had packed away and sent off somehow made their way back to me. Visiting family members deposited them on my doorstep when I wouldn't or couldn't answer the door, and I sifted through them when I had the strength. There were a lot of old photos, black and white and sepia colored, of our ancestors. Our family was largely made up of women. It seemed I had known this, but at the same time the realization was new to me. There were more females than males in those pictures, staunch women with stern faces, and in many of them the sternest women were the ones with a brooch pinned to their bosom. I knew that brooch. I had lost and found it, hidden it and retrieved it. It was mine. Something about my family, some strength of bloodline, had made it choose us as perfect victims. It told me as much every night it visited, fond and cruel as it sucked my life's essence from me, in a language only I could understand. Other victims failed quickly, either died from the strain or took their own lives. But not my family. We had the strength to take the abuse. It was nothing to be proud of, but somehow I was. Maybe because I had to cling on to something to keep me going. One morning found me in my new garden. I don't remember making my way there, and I was hardly dressed for the outdoors, but I had no problem being there. It had been neglected badly, and I felt a moment's guilt that my grandpa's prized garden was now overgrown and scruffy, but a moment's guilt was all I felt. I had laid the brooch on the bricks of the barbecue pit my grandpa had built. The grill that had cooked so many burgers and sausages over the decades was now rusty and grimy, but the bricks were as solid as the day they were laid. A weak autumn sun picked up the glimmer from the awkward shards of the ugly brooch, casting painful and slightly warped beams of color that hurt my sore eyes, but I didn't care. In my hands I held a large, pointed rock that I had apparently wrestled from a flower bed, and it was poised above the brooch. There was rich, dark earth clinging to half of the rock, healthy and fertile, but I had turned it around so the dry portion pointed downwards, a jagged edge hovering over the unnatural piece of jewelry. It was a weapon in my hands, as hard and cruel as the thing that fed on me. I may have considered what I was about to do, questioned it, wondered if it was a sensible idea. I don't remember. All I know is that I gave myself only a moment's hesitation before bringing the rock down. The brooch jumped beneath the impact, stuttered against the bricks, scoring a faint, pale line. The pin on the back of the brooch snapped with no resistance, but none of the enamel or glass chipped. I repositioned it with one clumsy hand and brought the rock down again. The metal buckled slightly, but again the core structure of the brooch held up. I could see no damage. Again and again, I moved the brooch, hammered my rock against it. Again and again, it refused to submit. The most that happened was an almost imperceptible crack that appeared along one portion of enamel, and that instant sent a jarring, piercing pain up my arm from my fingers to my shoulder, leaving the whole limb numb. If I thought I could succeed, I would have continued through the pain, would have kept hitting it till the thing was a pile of colorful dust, and I was writhing on the ground. But I knew there was no point. I threw my rock aside, picked up the brooch. The pin was snapped, but I spent half an hour digging out some glue and replacing the injured component. Even as I wept, I could not destroy it. My only option was to pass it on. There are many people in the world who deserve such a fate. Too many people. I had to find them. I knew it wouldn't release me, but it might give me some respite. My first attempt to deliver myself was at a school reunion. Under normal circumstances, I would not have attended, but my memories of school were very clear, and the miseries I had suffered there were not forgotten. I managed to make myself an admin on the reunion page on Facebook, and suggested a Secret Santa type arrangement as if it had been suggested to me by someone else. It was close enough to Christmas for others to pick up on the idea and approve of it, and it was the work of mere minutes to select my victim, a boy called Patrick who had been a sex offender in training, but was now a man who had somehow managed to convince the general public that he was respectable. He had a wife and children now. I didn't care. I remembered him only too well. The random draw I orchestrated made him mine, and I boxed and gift-wrapped my brooch with a barely containable glee that should have worried me but did not. I even laughed as I imagined his wife and kids sleeping peacefully whilst he struggled and gasped beneath the weight of my misshapen companion. I don't remember much about the night itself. I remember the looks people gave me, and though it made me resentful, I couldn't blame them. Aside from my weight loss and evident fatigue, my skin was pallid and paper thin, and some pure white hairs had crept in at my temples. I looked so ill I overheard people whispering about me, wondering if I had a terminal illness. Despite their concern, I had to laugh. Life itself is a terminal illness. The only other thing I remember is, of course, the Secret Santa. I was sitting in a corner by this point, barely able to keep awake, but I revived myself long enough to see Patrick open his gift. His face displayed an expression of polite horror he didn't bother to hide. If it had merely been a terrible gift, I had no doubt he would have said something funny and scathing, but the ugliness of the brooch seemed to have choked any words in his throat. He looked uneasy and uncomfortable, and I was glad. I left then, not bothering to open my own gift. I left it unwrapped on the floor by my chair and got an Uber home. I fell asleep quickly once in bed. I did every night, but this time there was no scuffling from under the bed as I was on the edge of sleep, and the silence was the most comforting noise. At some point during the night, however, I woke up with a start and tried to look at my clock to see what time it was. I couldn't move my head, and the realization filled me with such a sense of hopelessness I would have wept if I had the energy. Something was opening the door to my grandma's room, my room, now, and scraping its way at a crawl towards me. It was making a noise I had never heard it make before, a wet, phlegmy sound that grew louder until it was gurgling next to my ear. It was laughing in its warped way. Something was placed into my unresisting hand, and even though I couldn't see it, I knew the angles of the brooch without looking. My tormentor climbed onto my chest, sliding one hand beneath my head to raise it, and as it began to feed, it imparted its knowledge to me through its own brand of psychic communication. It didn't want to give me any clues, but it wanted me to know the details of my failure. I saw Patrick taking the brooch from his pocket as he left the reunion, and tossing it into a bin outside the school as he waited for his Uber to arrive. Was it really that easy for him? How is it possible? He owned it. I tried again. Of course I did. Any noble thoughts about bearing the curse and suffering alone had left me long ago. I gifted it to many people over the Christmas period and beyond. It always returned. There was a pattern forming, but I was too exhausted to see it. Once, I even gave it to a homeless man begging for change. This was the only transaction that gave me any pangs of guilt, as the other people I had tried to fob the brooch and its keeper off on had wronged me in some way. This man had done nothing to deserve it, but I was desperate. His face twisted when he saw what I'd given him, and recoiled in a jerking motion that had to be involuntary. He corrected his unfavorable reaction, shaking his head even as he accepted it, and turned it over in his hands with a look of horrified awe. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know. I found it," I told him. "Has to be worth something." He nodded, apparently satisfied with my reply, but I doubt he'd heard it. "It's horrible," he said. "I know," I said. He shrugged and put the brooch in his pocket. "Thank you," he said, sounding uncertain about his thanks, and I walked away. I had no grand expectations after my other failures, and despite the fact that he had apparently accepted it, the homeless man was not to be the new guardian of the brooch. It was returned by my creature's own hand, as usual, and the cycle continued. You may think I never discovered the secret to handing off the brooch. Well, I did. It took me far too long, but I managed. My first reprieve came in the form of a young goth boy with pierced lips and painted nails and white contacts. A beautiful creature, he came up to me in the street as if drawn to me by an invisible fishing line. I had taken to wearing the brooch. Why not? It was on the lapel of my coat for all to see, and a twisted part of me that had not existed before enjoyed the looks of disgust and disturbance it drew, but not this boy. His eyes were wide, and his lips stretched into a smile as he approached me. "What is that?" he asked me, fascinated. "Family heirloom," I told him, not bothering to lie. "It's horrible," he said, his voice almost affectionate with its awe. "I've never seen anything like it. Can I take a picture of it to show my girlfriend?" He already had his phone out, ready to take a photo, but I smiled at him. "Better than that. You can have it. Do you want it?" His eyes went wider still. "Well, yeah," he said as if it were a foregone conclusion, "but I can't take a family heirloom from you." The look of longing he gave the brooch was keen, and before I'd even realized what I was doing, I was unpinning it. "You can," I said. "It goes where it is wanted. That's how my family got it. My grandmother always told me it goes where it is needed, and if someone ever wanted it, I should give it to them." He absorbed my lies with a thoughtful expression. "If you're sure," he said. "I'm sure," I responded, and held it out to him. He took it from my raised palm, and from that moment I knew. You had to want it. That was the thing. It was no good being given it against your will. I had tried a few times to smuggle it onto people, dropping it into the open bag or exposed pocket of a stranger, but that didn't count. You had to want it. It's been 2 months since the boy took it from me. My sleep has been deep and my health blooming. I haven't touched my oxygen in weeks, and when I looked in the mirror this morning, the face that looked back was fresh and youthful and healthy, but I know it won't last. I can already feel an itching in the base of my skull. That might be the thoughts of my monster ready to return. Its food source is failing, but this time, I know what I have to do. I have already set up an eBay selling account, selling off bits and pieces of my grandmother's jewelry for now, alongside pieces I have found in thrift shops, and am doing good business. The brooch is strange and ugly, but I know it will resonate with someone out there, and I have a worldwide platform. When the sweet goth boy has gone, there will be others to take my burden, for a while. They started innocently enough. Don't forget your keys, read the first message, scrawled on a sticky note in loopy letters. It had been left on my fridge door. It immediately grabbed my attention because at the time I lived alone. I'd no memory of writing it, and the handwriting didn't match mine or anyone I knew. I was slightly perturbed, but wasn't sure how to react. In the end, I just tossed the note and went to work. The second note came a few days later, left on my kitchen counter. The sticky note was pink this time, but still had the same distinctive loopy handwriting. Make sure to pack a lunch today. Again, I was unsettled. Now, any normal person might have reported this to the police, but during that time I was going through a major depressive spell. I had moved to a new city away from my friends and family, and had started a new job that I quickly realized I hated, and didn't nearly pay enough. Home was lonely and work was soul-crushing. I had trouble enough getting out of bed each morning, let alone filling a report that I am sure the police would not take seriously. Even more stressed, I crumpled up the note. However, I ended up packing a small lunch for myself. Usually, I didn't bother to put in the effort, and just ate cafeteria food. But against my better judgment, I fulfilled the wishes of the note. That day, the cafeteria was closed. The main cafeteria fridge had broken overnight, and any of the frozen lunches instead had gone bad. Management thought it would be better to shut it down for the day. A feeling of unease settled in my stomach after learning the news. It was as if the note had predicted it. The notes continued throughout the following weeks. They would typically show up on random days. No more than 3 notes to a day. They were all left in obvious places in my apartment, all on sticky notes, and in that unfamiliar loopy handwriting. They began to grow more prophetic. Take I-80 today. There will be a bad accident on your way home. Janet is going to offer you some cookies at the office. Politely decline, they will give you food poisoning. Marie has been on a diet, compliment her on her weight loss. She'll end up thinking well of you. Of course, I tested the notes to see if they were accurate. Every time I ignored their advice, whatever it warned against came true. One day, a note said to pack an umbrella, and I purposely didn't. It was forecasted to be sunny that day, so any normal person wouldn't think to pack one. But sure enough, I got soaked that evening walking to my car. I was incredibly curious about the notes. There were so many questions I had about them, and those unanswered questions kept festering in my head. I tried writing notes back in return and leaving them out, but never got a response. I'd speak out loud and ask questions as if the note writer could somehow hear me, but this only made me feel foolish. I'd occasionally make a surprise visit home at odd hours, just to see if I could catch the note writer leaving their notes. Of course, I never caught them. I tried installing cameras in my apartment, even making sure all the cameras were completely hidden. But the next day, I found every single one of the camera's insides completely torn out, and placed on the kitchen table with a single note next to them, reading, "Never do that again." The note stopped coming after that, which made me deeply regretful. I had grown accustomed to the notes. I had begun to rely on them even. They had significantly improved my way of life over the last few months, both mentally, financially, and socially. I had actually started making friends at the office thanks to their advice, and for the first time in my life I was even a bit popular. My managers, who before the notes didn't pay much interest in me, now valued my presence and would ask my opinion in projects. It was no secret I was on my way to a promotion. Could I still do that without the notes? I also valued the notes as a friend, as weird as that sounds, or more like a guardian angel. Wherever they were from, they were always protecting me. Without them, the future was suddenly unknown, dangerous. Every time some mild annoyance popped up from that point, From bad traffic to stressful work situations and even a minor paper cut. I thought about how this all could probably have been avoided if I still had the notes. The next week, a bright green sticky note appeared on my bathroom mirror. Don't forget to call Mom today. It is her birthday. I nearly cried. I decided to sack my investigation and just accept things as they were. Slowly, the fog of my depression spell began to lift, and I could feel myself returning to how I used to be. My confidence rose, and for the first time in a while, I felt in equilibrium with my life. I went out, cracked jokes, and even managed to clean up my apartment. I also managed to get a girlfriend somehow. Her name was Amanda. I met her at a pub when I was out with my buddies. The best part of all of this is that, for some reason, she seemed to actually be into me. She was gorgeous, way out of my league really, with long auburn hair that reached down to her back, with soft brown eyes. Her laugh was lovely, and the lemon-scented perfume she liked to wear was intoxicating. She was the type of girl you could chat with for hours and never run out of things to talk about. The relationship was still new, so I was trying not to plan our whole future together in my head. But she was so lovable, it was hard not to. At some point, I briefly thought about telling her about the notes. I've always wanted to tell someone about it, but never really had anyone to tell up until now. I decided not to, however, afraid she might think I was crazy. There was no point so early in the relationship to make her think I was a loon. Plus, I was afraid the notes might stop again, if whoever was leaving them clearly didn't want me looking into them. How would they react if I shared what was happening with somebody? So at the moment, I kept it to myself. Amanda had a hobby of cooking, and had invited me to her house on Saturday for, in her words, the best spaghetti you'll ever eat. I was pumped since this was the first time I would actually visit her house. I was in a good mood that evening as I was getting ready for the date. I hummed to myself happily, thinking about how lovely this was going to be, and went downstairs to grab my keys. On the kitchen counter was a new hot pink sticky note. I picked it up instinctively. Kill your girlfriend. My brain stopped for a moment. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words flashing in my brain but hitting an error every time. I set the note down and gulped, feeling nauseous. Anxiously, I went to my car and started driving. I tried not to think about the note, but the words kept circling in my mind. Kill your girlfriend. The notes have never failed me before, and they were always in my best interest as far as I knew, which was admittedly not much. Maybe they were wrong this time. Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Kill could be a synonym for breakup, right? My mind kept trying to make up poor excuses the whole way there. By the time I arrived, I was a sweaty mess and not a lick calmer. I pulled down my sun visor to check my face, and a bright green sticky note fluttered out. I went cold. The notes had never appeared outside my house before. Hand shaking, I picked up the note and read it. Kill Amanda. Take the gun from your glove box and shoot her. I looked at my glove box wide-eyed. I did indeed keep a handgun in my glove box for safety purposes. I wanted to puke, to believe this wasn't happening. Again, I ignored the note and walked up to Amanda's house, trying to shake the message from my mind. She answered the door almost immediately after I rang the doorbell. Hey, what's up? She said with a bright smile. But when she saw my face, the smile dropped. You okay, Gary? What's wrong? She said in concern. Nothing, I lied, trying to force a smile. Well, actually, I think I have a bit of a stomach ache. Come in, she said, ushering me in. The inside of her house was cute and homely, and she fretted over me worriedly as she led me over to the kitchen table. She then took my hand and rubbed it comfortingly. If you're not feeling up to spaghetti, we can always have it another time. Don't worry about it. Do you want any antacids or something? I smiled. The way she was so concerned for me over a simple stomachache made me fall in love with her all over again. My heart panged with both love and guilt. The aroma of cooked spaghetti was also extremely strong, and even though she said it was fine, I knew it would probably be a bummer for her to pack away all that spaghetti after just making it. I'm fine, sweetie. I probably have a stomachache because I haven't eaten much today. I was looking forward so much for your spaghetti. Her smile returned again. I always loved how fast she smiled at things. Well then, Mr. Hungry, let me grab you a bowl. She left for the kitchen. I reclined back and sighed, sticking my hands in my pockets. I felt a crinkle of paper. I pulled the paper out of my right pocket. Take your chair and bash your head in. I had a hard time controlling my breathing as I stuffed the note back in my right pocket. I also felt paper in my left pocket, and against my mind screaming for me not to, I pulled it out, realizing that it was actually 2 notes crinkled together. Shakily, I unwrinkled the first one. Do not eat the spaghetti. Drugged. What's that, Gary? Asked Amanda behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I stuffed the notes back in my left pocket. Oh, just some note from work I forgot was in my pocket is all, I said in a weird voice. She frowned, looked like she wanted to say something, but then thought better of it. Here, babe, she said gently, handing me a bowl of spaghetti. It looked heavenly. I wanted to puke. She sat next to me with her own bowl. She rested her head in her hands and looked at me excitedly, expectantly. I stared at her blankly. Well, take a bite, silly, she said, gesturing towards my bowl. I'm so sorry. I really need to use your bathroom. I jumped up and started looking for her bathroom. She jumped up after me, looking confused. Gary, what's wrong? You've been acting weird. When I found the right door, I went in and locked the door behind me. She kept knocking and knocking. Gary? Gary! Seriously, what's wrong with you? Is the stomachache that bad? Talk to me, Gary, please. I backed up against the bathroom wall, then sank down to the floor. I pulled out the 2 notes from my left pocket again, this time reading the second note. My heart sank as the note read, She is not Amanda. I flew out to New York some nights ago for my good friend's wedding. Despite a relatively turbulent flight filled with constant rerouting, the trip has otherwise been life-changing so far. I don't travel often, my career is pretty demanding, and free time is a rarity, so I figured this trip would be a good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I would head to New York early to check out some awesome and iconic sites, and then I'd segue into attending this major milestone for one of my dearest mates. The hotel that I'm staying at, Hotel Salvis, is pretty damn awesome. The rooms are gorgeous, the service is fantastic, and there's a real nice flair to the space. For lack of a better term, coming back to a place like this night after hours of sightseeing in NYC, was an absolute treat. Of all of the interesting things about the hotel, the one I have to call out the most is the lobby. It is sprawling, huge, Gorgeous. It has a breathtaking bar area, a luxurious restaurant area, and a large seating space adorned with some gorgeous furniture. It is a massive 360-degree area that has exits all around it, and of course, a sizable front desk area with lots of eager employees at the helm. You could take the hallways leading out to the exits, or up to the elevators if you'd like, but it always felt fun to pass through the large middle area of the lobby and soak in some of the fun energy. On top of that, most of the hallways were generally quite empty, so it felt nice to be where all the action was. What I loved, more than anything, was that it was always lively in the lobby. It's 11 p.m., and I'm gonna leave my room for a spontaneous romp around the city. No worries, I'll pass through that lobby and I'll see people jovial, sharing drinks, eating great food, swapping stories, and having a ball. I come back at 2 a.m. People are still there, still having good times. I love this city, I thought to myself. I could only imagine what sorts of adventures these folks were going to have here during their travels. So, it had been an awesome trip so far, and it was now the night before the wedding activities were about to start. I was heading to my room after another successful night of exploring the city. I trekked through the lively bar area in the lobby and did a double take when I heard one of the bartenders call out to me. "You're looking a little glum, Peter." I do have a resting sad face. Good catch. Name's not Peter. It's Kevin actually. The folks sitting at the bar started to laugh a little bit. An elderly woman seated near the bartender shot me a smile. Sounds like the newbie wants everyone to know his name. Maybe he'll even sit down and join us, she said, playfully. I've got some plans That's when another older gentleman in a brown leather jacket interrupted. Sit down and have a drink. You have nowhere else to be. Screw it. This was kind of what I was hoping would happen. It felt like everyone here was having a good time with each other, so it felt nice to be invited to the festivities. I sat and joined everyone there for what was a very fun few hours. They asked me about what brought me here and why I was visiting, and I have to say, they were incredible listeners. Drinks were on them, and as someone who doesn't get to spend a lot of time just going with the flow, a spontaneous night of drinking with strangers was just what the doctor ordered. It was a well-needed reprieve from my usual life of work hard, save money, you can relax later. I was on holiday, and to have such worldly folks hanging off my every word was a good feeling. Off the heels of a fantastic night on an already fantastic vacation, I went up to my room, ready to call it a day. Wedding season was going to kick in very soon, so I figured it'd be smart to get some extra shut-eye. I entered my room. As I changed into my sleeping clothes, I noticed an enclosed envelope on my bedside table. It was tucked under a plastic display that had some generic hotel policy stuff on it. Interesting. Maybe some sort of coupon. Or thank you for staying with us. Note, not ever being one to take my time in opening up gifts, I snatched the envelope, opened it, and gave the letter inside a read. I was expecting to see some fancy letterhead, but instead, what I found in this envelope was a scribbled note on a piece of paper that looked as if it had been torn out of an old notebook. It read, "By now, you probably have some sense of what's going on. My best advice is to be very mindful about your remaining hours of tranquility. Assuming you're reading this on Thursday night, you have about 24 hours remaining. The hotel rules are mostly accurate. That said, no one can actually promise you that suicide will help you escape. If you want to talk, I'm the guy with the red jacket in the lobby. Best wishes." What? I was aware that this was likely a sinister prank by someone, but it still felt unbelievably intrusive. I wasn't sure if it was the guest who stayed in this room before me deciding to pull a trick on me, or if it was a room service person who had a morbid sense of humor. Whatever it was, it felt a bit extreme. I pondered it over for a moment, and then left my room, went into the empty hallway, and headed towards the elevator. I wanted to report this. I wanted to get it resolved and out of my brain as fast as possible so that I could have a good night's sleep. It was odd. Even though I was something like about 5 floors above the main lobby, it felt like I could hear the bustle and sound of the main floor much closer to me than I knew it was. I arrived at the ground floor and went right up to the front desk staff, letter in hand. There they were, fully attentive and bright as always. I felt a bit ashamed coming up to them with something negative to report, but I figured it had to be done. "Hey, sorry, I just needed some help. Saw something weird in my room." I stopped as I saw both of the 2 front desk workers eye the envelope in my hand. They whispered to each other and then turned their attention back to me. "What can we do for you, sir?" they asked. I had this letter show up on the table in my room. It had some weird stuff written on it, and it said it was from the guy in the red jacket. The hotel worker nodded. "He's heard this one before," I thought to myself. He subtly rolled his eyes before responding. "We'll take care of this immediately, sir. Thank you for bringing it to our attention." The front desk worker nudged his colleague, and they both made their way into the lobby. They looked back at me with a quick nod, sort of signaling a wait right there message, and I watched them head to the lobby area. They walked towards a solitary man donning a red jacket sitting in a large seating area, alone. He stuck out like a sore thumb. Couldn't miss him. I'm not sure what compelled me to do this, but I decided to walk over to them to catch their conversation. When I arrived, they were wrapping up, but I could still hear snippets of their back and forth. The hotel staff saying that it wasn't his place to influence guests, and him saying, I got it, sorry." As they saw me arrive, the gentleman in the red jacket turned to me and spoke. "Nice to meet you, Kevin. I'm sorry about the letter." The front desk workers looked at me, their eyes red. "Are we all good here?" I shot them a moderately confused nod. "All good," I said back. The staff made their way out of the lobby and back to their desks. I continued to stand near the man in the red jacket. "Mind if I sit?" I asked him. He nodded. I took a seat. "So, how'd you know my name again?" I asked. He snickered. "I overheard all of you at the bar earlier tonight. Sounds like you guys were having a great time." He motioned to the crew of elderly folks who were all seated at the bar close to us. As he looked over, they noticed me and started cheering. I heard a smattering of their different voices. "Hey, Kevin's back." "Oh look, it's Kevin. Join us, man. Let's make it a late night." The gang was still all there, as welcoming and excited as ever. The man in the red jacket started laughing. "Am I meant to believe you still don't get it?" he said. He continued silently snickering to himself. It was annoying. "Hey man, if you have a penchant for leaving incredibly inappropriate letters in people's rooms, I want to let you know that." He interrupted me. "I'm trying to help you. Clearly you've been in La La Land. That's not necessarily all on you. The hotel doesn't always make it super clear. They're trying to help, but you have to pay attention and actually look over the crap they give you with your room key or the stuff they leave in your room. Most people don't realize it immediately, and since others aren't really allowed to say too much, bad things happen. So, if you want the short explanation, you can't leave this place, right?" As I'd suspected, this guy was just a freak with a sick sense of humor. And why is that? Am I gonna be absorbed into the hotel, the shining style? Are we following Hotel California rules? Let me guess, I can check out anytime I'd like, but I can never leave. He interrupted my snark with an exasperated groan. "Let me rephrase it, smarty pants. You shouldn't leave. You very much can. I've seen you leaving constantly, on your merry way, every single day. But, very soon, you should be stopping that," he said, while pointing all across the main floor to all of the exits surrounding us. Before I could respond, there was an awkward pause. The folks at the bar were heating up with laughter. They were really into their conversation, extremely loud. I found a gap where they quieted down and I continued. "And why is that? If I leave the hotel, am I gonna be caught in some sort of sinister happening that takes place in New York City this time of year? Are there ghosts trolling the streets? Gremlins, potentially?" I said. "This isn't New York." "What?" He leaned in closer. "This isn't New York. It may look like it, sound like it, taste like it, but it's not New York." This guy was messing with me. It was the one single not great thing that had happened on this trip so far, and at this point, I was over it. "Buddy, I get that you like to play pranks on people, but this is getting..." He got up from his seat. "Listen, I did my part. I'm not a talker, and this conversation's gonna go in circles, so let me just leave it at this. Whether you're a superstitious person or the most grounded son of a bitch there is, just be sure you're back inside tomorrow well before 8 p.m. I saw you when you first came in. We all did, 5 days ago. Tomorrow marks your 6th-day anniversary. I'd recommend playing it safe. Best wishes," he said. He looked at the exit doors, and then back at me. "Once you make it to then, I think you'll understand." And with that, he got up and walked off, leaving me with a strange, unsettling feeling. While he said his words with conviction, my gut didn't feel great about this guy. I didn't buy it. I got up to head back to my room, when I noticed the folks at the bar all looking at me, and all lighting up as I walked past. Screw it, the bar lobby is always a good time. I needed to shake off the bad energy. As I made my way to an open bar seat, the bartender gave me the same line he said to me earlier in the night. "You're looking a little glum, Peter. It's still Kevin. But nice to see you again, sir." I plopped down at the lively bar area. The elderly woman I spoke with earlier kicked it off again. "You got any new stories for us, Kevin? Maybe tell us what you do for a living." I laughed. They were odd but endearing. I rattled off random anecdotes and stories, and again, the group was great at asking follow-up questions, listening carefully and laughing at every joke I said. Even the folks at the far end of the bar who couldn't hear me seemed to be having a pretty good time just by me being there. While being the life of the party was nice, I still couldn't shake the weird pit of my stomach sensation I had from speaking with the man in the red jacket. After about an hour of hanging out, I decided to leave and go up to my room. As I made my way to the elevator, I looked back to the folks in the lobby. They remained lively, extremely loud, drinking, immersed in conversations. They smiled at me as I looked back. I continued on my way, but thought to myself, the lobby feels safe. I want to stay there. I made it back to my room. My friends were gonna arrive very late that night, and so we were all gonna meet up together tomorrow. I made sure to focus on getting a good night's sleep and tried to keep my mind off of the weird happenings I'd run into that day. I slept in and woke up the next day, completely fresh and ready for the day ahead of me. Or so I thought. I started with my normal morning routine. Splash my face with some water, a big stretch, cup of joe from the coffee machine in my room. Spend some quality time waking up before checking my phone. This was holiday time. Less screens, more mindfulness. I pulled the window curtains and looked outside. I admired the beauty of the city. This isn't New York. Well, could have fooled me, you psycho. After a tranquil moment, I opened up my phone. I was excited to dig into what our plans for today were. My friends were wholly responsible for where we were going to meet, what we were going to do. In the spirit of my holiday, I was once again ready to go with the flow. I looked at my phone. The group text conversation with my friends was blowing up. They were all downstairs in the lobby. Awesome. Glad they all made it okay. I texted them to let them know I'd meet them at the bar, and I was on my way. I left my room, went down the empty hallway, and made my way to the elevator. The words of the man in the red jacket were starting to float around in my brain. The hotel doesn't always make it super clear. You have to pay attention. I got in the elevator. The doors closed in front of me. I decided to properly take in my surroundings during this short trek to the main floor, and noticed a large advertisement in the elevator. I read it carefully. Hotel Salvis, you're not just safe, you're with friends. What? The doors opened and I was on the ground floor, dazzling and gorgeous as ever, with an attentive crew working the front desk, and that same gang of folks hanging out in the lively middle area of the lobby. I walked towards the bar, and again, the usual suspects there noticed me and lit up immediately. It dawned on me that a lot of these folks were drinking very early in the day. I mean, come on, it was like 11 a.m., and I'd seen some of these folks drinking into the late hours of the night before too. The group started up as they always did. Kevin, got some stories for us, Big Kev, man of the hour. I sat amongst these strangers while simultaneously checking my phone minute by minute and scanning my surroundings for my friends. My friends kept saying they were at the bar, but I couldn't see them anywhere. It was alright though. The lobby felt safe. The lobby was alright. Jesus, I noticed that my inner monologue was getting stranger. Why was my gut feeling continually telling me that the lobby was safe? I continued checking my phone and looking around for them, while haphazardly answering the questions of the folks at the bar, and riffing off of their anecdotes. It was the same folks as before, the elderly woman, the bartender, the man in the brown leather coat, and other familiar faces that had grown to become mainstays here. What's new in your world, Kevin? Oh, not much, really. You know, I came here with Debbie. You know Debbie. There she always goes wandering off. I should have kept an eye on her. That's great. Always good to come with company. Looking a little glum, Peter and Kevin. But it's cool. You can call me Peter if you want. I was barely attentive and just continually eyeing my phone. My friends kept insisting they were right here, grabbing drinks from the bar. Was there another bar inside that I had completely missed? Or something? I continued lounging around, and to my continual surprise, even my half-assed answers to the bar folks were being received very positively. I guess they all just liked my vibe, fighting off thoughts about scary hotel folk tales or fears that maybe I was dead and this was some sort of purgatory. I got up from my seat and headed out to one of the exits. Even with the man in the red jacket's warnings in the back of my mind, I had some time, right? I texted my friends to let them know I'd meet them at the front entrance. I opened the doors and went into the outside world, and things were fine. I took a stroll around the neighborhood. I smiled at strangers. This was still New York. Of course it was. I unfortunately still couldn't find my friends, but I still enjoyed my hours in the city, remaining diligent of the time and keeping my eyes peeled for more responses from my friends. I made my way back to the hotel at 6 p.m. sharp. Let's arrive early, I thought to myself. I won't tempt fate. I arrived and walked right on through the lobby past all of the infused strangers I'd come to know over the last few days. I made my way up to my room. I sat on my bed. I was ignoring texts and calls from my friends at this point. I wanted to wait until it was past 8 p.m. Once I knew everything was okay, then we could all meet up again. The minutes passed by excruciatingly long. What was I doing? This was stupid. This anxiety wasn't warranted. Red jacket guy was just messing with me. Everything is fine. I'm sure me and my friends are all just lost and need to look at a map or something. I took a deep breath, letting the time pass. It was 7:40 p.m. Hell, time wasn't moving fast enough. To get my mind off of everything, I made a cup of coffee and explored the hotel room. I pulled the curtains back and looked outside. Still gorgeous, still New York. I explored the drawers and cupboards in the room, all empty. Fair enough. I scanned the room. Bed, closet, a quaint-looking bedside table with a plastic display on it with some generic hotel language. I wasn't sure if my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still felt like I could still hear the buzzing of the lobby, the music, the banter, glasses clinking. The lobby was safe. God damn it. My inner monologue was seriously starting to slip away from me. I was probably spending too much time there. I could still hear the bartender in my head saying, "You're looking a little glum, Peter." And the elderly woman saying, "Oh, Kevin's stories are marvelous. Always a thrill to hear new stories." The sounds were so vivid, it almost felt like all of them were directly downstairs from me or something. 7:55 p.m. I continued exploring. I opened another drawer, a laminated sheet of paper, and a gun next to it. What the hell? I could feel myself shivering a little bit. My heart was racing. I pulled the curtains back again to peek outside at New York. I needed to ground myself. Yep, it was still there. Still New York. It's all okay. Maybe just something the last guest left in this room. I returned to the drawer. I read the sheet next to the gun. Its title was A Guide to Quick and Effective Suicide by Hotel Salvis. Nope, didn't need that in my life. Just ignore it. 7:59 p.m. Staring outside. Still New York. And there it was. 8 p.m. Then 8:01 p.m. 8:02 p.m. 8:03 p.m. It was all okay. Then came 3 knocks. Someone was at the door. I was on autopilot at this point. I grabbed the gun from the drawer. I looked outside my door's peephole. It was the man in the red jacket. I'd had enough of this prank. Trembling, I opened the door and immediately pointed my gun at him. His hands shot up above his head instantly. "Hey, I'm sorry, I cut him off. Stop messing with me," I shouted. "I'm not, I swear, I'm not. I was sorry that Damn, he looked scared. All of the fears I'd been pushing to the back of my mind were coming to the forefront. I asked him, "Am I dead? Is this like purgatory or something?" No, you're not dead. You're still on Earth. What's with the weird stuff around the hotel? Why is everyone in the lobby all the time? For heaven's sake, I'm pointing a gun at you and shouting in the hallway and there's no one else here." He kept his hands up. He took in a deep breath and he answered, "The lobby's the only place that drowns out the sounds. That's why we're all down there. Why we're always down there. The sounds." I asked, "For the love of God, please don't shoot me. I have no idea what'll happen if I die." "What does that even mean? Didn't you look through the guides in your room? On your bedside table? The thing I put my envelope under?" He said back, nervously shouting, "That nonsensical hotel rules guide on the table in the plastic casing." No, I guess I didn't. I backed into the room and slammed the door behind me. I put my gun on the bedside table. I read over the plastic display's generic hotel guidelines. Guidelines for Hotel Salvis, 6 days of tranquility on us. We strongly discourage guests from leaving the hotel after the tranquility period has passed. The tranquility period cannot be extended. Do not impede people's autonomy. Their decisions are theirs, and theirs alone. If you choose to kill yourself, or if you die of natural causes, it is possible that you can escape this fate. Drinks are free. Let our bartender extraordinaire take care of you. Tell him Peter sent you. No smoking in the lobby, please. Have a wonderful stay. Hotel Salvis cannot fully assure that you will be able to escape. Before I could process what I'd read, I heard it. The sounds. I could feel them inside me. It felt like the whole world was shaking. Like my soul was shaking. Like banshees, shrieking at their absolutely highest pitch, flooding my senses. I pulled the curtains aside and looked outside the window. It wasn't a city anymore. It wasn't anything, just a never-ending space that stretched as far as I could look. The space had colors of thick black and crimson red all around it. I continued staring to catch the sight of anything that looked familiar. Off in the very far distance, shrouded by the fog of black and red colors, I swore I could see the Empire State Building. What the hell is this? Damn, the noises. I had to get away from them. I backed away from the window in fear. I stumbled out of the room. The man in the red jacket was still there. You're hearing it now, aren't you? He said. I was emotional. Where the hell am I, man? He helped me to my feet. Let's drown out the noise first. We walked down the hallway, into the elevator, and down to the ground floor. The noises were everywhere. A choir of it. It was amplified, overwhelming. I could feel it in the center of my head. All around me, we emerged into the lobby. The familiar music and liveliness. He was right. It was drowning out the noise. Little by little, the lobby is safe. The group of usual guests at the bar lit up as we rounded the corner. Everyone was there, seated, smiling as we arrived. I made it to the bar, with the man in the red jacket beside me. The bartender greeted us. You're looking a little glum, Peter. I didn't dignify it with a response this time. I just sighed. At least, the screeching was somewhat blacked out. I looked up at the bartender. He wasn't really looking at me. He was looking past me, to the exit doors surrounding us on the main floor. I turned around and looked at the exits. With the backdrop of a never-ending space of crimson red and pitch black, there it was, them, pressing up against the doors, wanting to be let inside. Come on, Kevin, tell us some new stories, said the elderly woman. I ignored it. I came with Debbie, should have kept my eyes on her, but I lost her, said the man in the brown leather jacket. The man in the red jacket started speaking. Peter is the bartender's son. Years back when they first arrived, Peter stayed outside past the tranquility period. He didn't know what it meant at the time. He motioned to the others seated with me. Some people have been here longer than others. Many of them lost someone they traveled with to the outside, didn't realize the severity of the tranquility period, and now they're all here in the lobby looking for distractions to drown out the noise. I scanned the bar. Everyone was smiling and cheering, but I saw the crinkles of desperation in the corners of their eyes, something I didn't notice before. They had to be loud to drown it all out. Where are we? The man in the red jacket took a moment to really think. We're still here, on planet Earth. From the discussions all of us have had at the bar, it sounds like we all had the same thing happen on our trip here. At some point, late in the flight, the pilot had to reroute due to turbulence. That happened to me too, and we ended up here. Very similar to New York by all accounts. At first, anyways. Heck, if you stare out hard enough into the strange horizon surrounding us, you can see little hints that NYC physically ain't that far from us. But right now, we're trapped. Not in purgatory. Very much ourselves, and very much alive. But if we leave this building, we're at the whim of whatever's out there. And whatever's out there doesn't seem to be very friendly. I looked outside. The noises were coming to the forefront again. Those screams. At first, it sounded like evil creatures, banshees, demons, something in that universe. But something about the sounds was starting to become clear to me. There was almost a human quality to them. You're looking a little glum, Peter. I could sense the lump in his throat as the bartender said it again, looking straight outside, straight at something, the remnants of someone familiar begging to be let in. As I watched the chaos outside the exits, I turned my attention back to the folks around me. the loud anecdotes, and conversations and stories and drinks designed to drown out the noise. My phone continued blowing up with calls and texts from friends and family, but I ignored them. None of that was important right now. Soon, I was going to formulate a plan, figure out exactly where all of us were, and see if there was some way we could get out of this place. In the meantime, I owed the man in the red jacket a drink for saving me from what seemed to be a hellish eternal fate. Now, it wasn't a celebration, a wedding, or a holiday anymore, but it was okay. The lobby is safe. My 6-year-old daughter Jane has recently started to enjoy playing hide and seek. At first, I thought it was cute. Jane has always enjoyed games like this, so I didn't think much of it. I figured it was something she had played at school, and thought that she'd be bored of it by the end of the week. Kids are always finding new ways to entertain themselves, so it wasn't unusual when she started asking to play. I thought it was something fun that we could do together, and I wanted to promote her creativity. It wouldn't take me that long to find her anyway, as she was notorious for attempting to hide in plain sight. Jane really liked hide and seek though, and never seemed to get weary of it. So for the next 2 months it became sort of routine. Aside from the longevity, it was nothing to be concerned about. That was until today, when I came home from work. I walked in through the garage and saw our nanny Sue, frantic that she couldn't find Jane. Of course, this panicked me, so I asked Sue when she last saw Jane. She told me that Jane had wanted to play hide and seek like usual, so she turned her back and counted to 10 while Jane hid. When she turned around, Jane was gone. Sue said she looked under the couch, in the bedrooms, and under the beds, behind doors, and multiple other places. This went on for almost 30 minutes, and she still couldn't find her. Sue then told me that she had called out to Jane, telling her she wins and to come out from her hiding spot. But Jane never came out, so thinking that Jane hadn't heard her, she continued to look and call her name. After an hour had passed though, Sue began to panic. She ran throughout the house yelling for Jane and telling her it wasn't funny anymore. No response. I even asked Sue if she had possibly heard movement or giggling, something to give away Jane's hiding spot, but she said no. At this point, Sue was in tears, profusely apologizing and practically gagging on her words. I felt awful that my daughter had done this. She had never misbehaved in this way, and she loved Sue too much to make her worry. So I gathered my composure and assured her that Jane had to be in the house. She's too short to unlock the door to go outside, and told her we could look together. We must have looked for hours, in and under every place a child could hide or fit, when I finally remembered a spot that Sue would never think to look. It was Jane's closet, in the far back behind her clothes, in the bottom right corner. There was a little door that had once been used as a dumbwaiter. I forgot that it even existed, but I rushed to Sue and told her. Gasping between words, we ran to Jane's room and frantically pulled the closet door open, almost taking it off its hinges. I dropped to my knees and shoved a mound of clothes to the right, and there it was. Right in front of us was the door to the dumbwaiter. It was painted over with a coat of white paint, but you could see the dark outline square in the wall. The silence between Sue and I was deafening. I knew we were both fearing the worst. I called out to Jane, told her that it was time to stop hiding now, but there was no response. I slowly reached for the handle, my heart beating so loud I could hear it in my ears, and slid the door open. Inside was Jane, but it was a horrifying discovery. Her body was contorted and mangled. Her knees were bent at a 90-degree angle so her feet touched the top of the dumbwaiter. Her arms twisted grotesquely between them. Her long hair fell around her face and body, only her eyes visible through the strands, and her fingernails were bleeding from digging into the wood. Sue and I fell back in sync with each other, terrified, unable to grasp what we were witnessing. After a moment, Sue said that she must have been in shock, possibly from broken bones, so she began to stand up to call an ambulance. It was then when Sue moved that Jane started to scream. It was a shrill, animalistic scream, like a deer that's been hit by a car and left to die. Despite this, Sue managed to stand up and find her cell phone to call an ambulance. It wasn't until she returned that the screaming stopped. I thought that maybe Jane had passed out from pain, so I slowly scooted my way towards her. I must have only moved a few inches when I saw her eyes locked on me, unblinking and glazed over. I called her name gently, but something inside me told me not to go near her. I wanted to console her, but I was scared of her. I was scared of my own daughter. It must have been about 5 minutes before I heard the sound of the ambulance outside the house. Flashes of red shined through the window of Jane's room, and a wave of relief washed over me. I looked back over at Jane, but instead saw the door of the dumbwaiter closing, and the top of Jane's head going down. I jumped towards it and managed to stop it at the last second, my hand between the door and the inside of the dumbwaiter. I yelled to Sue to go downstairs and get the medics, when a sharp pain suddenly shot through my index finger. I screamed and pulled my finger away, a trail of blood following on the floor. I then watched as the dumbwaiter door closed, and could hear Jane giggling as she was being lowered down. But I had soon forgotten about that as the agonizing pain in my finger quickly became unbearable. I brought my hand up slowly to where I could see it, and unwrapped my other hand from it. I almost passed out from the sight. Half of my index finger had been reduced to a stub. It had been bitten off right at the joint. I felt the blood swelling up inside, throbbing against the skin. I then heard Sue come running in, alerting the medics down the hall to come quickly. I tried to tell her about Jane, to tell the medics to check the basement for her, but I could barely get my first word out before everything went dark. I don't remember much after that, only that I woke up in the hospital, which is where I am now. The police came and went about an hour ago. They questioned Sue and I separately, then told me that the only evidence they'd found was a broken window in the basement, my blood on the bedroom floor, and the other half of my finger in the dumbwaiter. No sign of Jane in the house or outside, even with the help of police dogs. So, as of right now, she's been marked as a missing person. I could tell by their tone that they're not too hopeful of finding her, but I know she's out there somewhere. That simple thought alone terrifies me, and I can't stop myself from thinking that this is still a game of hide and seek to her. A bigger one, with more people to play. So if you see her, maybe in the woods or in your house somewhere, take my warning. Don't play hide and seek with her. It may surprise you to know that almost 90% of Maine is covered in forests. Even in this modern age, there is true wilderness. that hides mysteries to be explored. It's one of the reasons I became a park ranger, the chance to be in the outdoors, to enjoy the wild, untamed wilderness. I know better now. I know better than to explore that which should be left alone. And now I warn you, after getting my dream job, I was assigned to a small ranger station up in northern Maine. The area was stunning in its natural beauty. Trees hundreds of years old grew to touch the sky, and rocky terrain led to a wonderful landscape of hills and valleys. Ever since I was a scout as a child, I had imagined being able to enjoy this serenity as my actual job, and here it was in reality. The ranger station was a converted log cabin, which gave me an instant feeling of rustic warmth. Inside, a fire was crackling, and an older man was tending to it. I walked in, hand extended. "Hi, I'm the new ranger assigned here, glad to meet you." I waited in awkward silence and dropped my hand as the man ignored me for a few minutes before turning around and standing tall. He was a stout and portly man with graying hair who looked me up and down before walking away from me over to a table with a coffee pot. I sat in silence while he poured himself a cup and let the steam rise as he sat down in a large wooden chair. "So you're the new help they're sending me?" The man took a long drink from his mug. His voice was raspy, like he'd smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. "Yes, sir. Ranger Parson here and ready," I uttered almost giddily. Another silence as the portly man glared at me. "That is way too much energy for this time of day." "Sorry, sir, just excited." "No more of this sir stuff. Name is Hicks, so please use it." He put his mug down and got up from the chair, grabbing his coat off a rack, and gestured for me to follow. Hicks led me to the ranger truck and gestured for me to get inside. "Come on, help. Let's get you acquainted with the woods here." We drove in silence for a while as we navigated the truck through some rough dirt roads weaving through the thick forest as I admired the beauty of it all. "So listen up, Parson. This job is life and death for folks, so you need to be alert and ready at all times." My back unconsciously sat upright and straight. "Yes, Hicks, of course." We arrived at the top of a ridgeline looking out over a vast swath of forest. Hicks got out, and I followed, walking to the edge where he was standing. The sun was going down, and the red sky made the area look like something out of a painting. My admiration for the natural beauty was broken when Hicks shoved a pair of binoculars in my hand and gestured out to the vista. "From here you can see the 3 fire lookout stations," motioning to the 3 specks of light in the now darkening forest distance. "We'll get you acquainted with the fire watchers, as we've had some issues recently." I dropped the binoculars. "Issues?" Hicks nodded. "Some folk tales tell of something that inhabits these woods that kills or causes people to go missing. All nonsense, of course, but kids and weirdos have been certain it exists, and have been combing this place for proof, causing hell and being destructive to the environment. Spooky folk tales were hardly anything new to me. Some such nonsense that started with tales of people going missing in the woods only to have people swear they see them later. The main culprit for this silliness was a group of hikers who were found dead back in 1970, though I guess there's been tales of similar fates for years before. I admit I swallowed a bit hard. "What happened to them?" Hicks rubbed his hand the back of his head, recalling. "Unfortunately, a bear, a big one it seems, had clearly gotten them, as there were claw and bite marks that ripped through them and their tents. Nasty stuff. To this day we'll get reports of people claiming they saw a bloodied hiker, or even an old frontiersman calling out for help with those who go looking for them not returning." Hicks cleared his throat, and his raspy voice returned. "Idiots have come out here littering and almost starting forest fires looking for signs of these ghost people or monsters, or whatever they are, especially ever since that true crime podcast, The Deep Forest, came out about the camping incident, speculating wildly about what really happened." Hicks gestured to get back into the truck, and we began to drive to the ranger station. "I'm not familiar with that podcast. The damn thing put this area on the radar of every wackadoo out there, and makes our jobs miserable, as we often have to go rescue the idiots who don't properly prepare for actual wilderness." I sat and took in what Hicks had said, watching the now dark forest go by, illuminated only by the truck's headlamps. Question: has anyone actually gone missing after seeing these lost people in the woods? It was a surprise to hear Hicks' hesitation after his otherwise completely dismissal just a few minutes before. "The woods here are old, very old, and unforgiving for those who don't treat it with respect. People have gone missing but all can be explained by getting lost or having an unfortunate encounter with wildlife. He sighed and gave a forced laugh. No monsters are out here. The next few months were delightfully uneventful other than the occasional idiot, as Hicks always called them, getting hurt and needing help. I became friends with one of the fire watchers at Point Alpha by the name of Iris. Her soft voice often called over the radio just to chat at night about the stars whom she stared at fervently while on her watch. The other two towers checked in but seemed to relish in the isolation, never wanting to engage. Then the day came when a motley group of 6 younger folks made their way up to the ranger station. I say younger as if I'm an old coot, and Hicks was clearly rubbing off on me. Almost all were on their phones casting to TikTok or other social media. The guy leading them was lean and sported a short beard and walked towards Hicks and I, while his compatriots streamed their entry to the woods. "Get ready," Hicks' gruff voice mumbled to me. "What brings you here today, son?" he called out to the young man approaching. "Hey there, officers. We are just filing our camping plan," who tried to shove some papers in Hicks' hands, but he was not bemused, nodding over to me to take them. "We're not officers, son. We're park rangers. Are you sure you folks are ready for a few days in these deep woods? This place ain't exactly the easiest to camp in." The young man looked almost hurt. "That's exactly why we're here, officer. We're doing an on-location episode of our podcast. I'm sure you've heard of it, the Deep Forest." Any hint of amusement now left Hicks. "I see. And what exactly will you all be doing out there?" By now a few of their group had walked over to the young man, and a young woman called out, "Josh, everything okay? I want to get some recordings before we set up camp." "Yes, no problems, just letting the officers know where we're gonna be out here." He gestured to the two of us as the young woman took out a small microphone attached to her phone. "Cammy, let's start with these 2 officers. Would you 2 tell us what you know of the mystery of the Deep Forest 7, the campers who met grisly ends out here in the wilds back in 1970? Shoving the microphone in Hicks' face, Hicks shot daggers in the girl's direction, who seemed oblivious. "Listen here good, Josh. Was it? You and your little cohort will respect the rules, or I will personally throw you out of these woods. Do not camp within 100 feet of any water source. Do not under any circumstances violate the campfire rules. And I better not hear of you all vandalizing these woods. You are expected to return them as pristine as when you went into them. And most importantly, do not dig anywhere." Hicks then turned and walked away back into the cabin, leaving them with me. Well, he was no help. "What about you, officer? What strange things have you seen out here? Ever seen any previously missing campers out in the woods?" As he said, "We are rangers, not officers. Nothing strange here, just beautiful but true wilderness, so be safe out there." The girl previously called Cammy pulled the microphone away. I think that will be a good intro as we cut to our next segment, talking about how the campers thought everything was safe too before being killed. Josh nodded. "Well, hey officer, we'll keep the forest all nice and neat, and we'll see you back here in 5 days. There's a special spot we are going to be camping at. Supposedly it's where the center of the forest is." Jogging back to the others, Josh and Cammy joined the cavalcade of social media posting as they began to journey into the woods. Walking back into the cabin, Hicks was at the coffee pot, as he so often was, shaking his head, muttering idiots over and over. "Parsons, make sure you keep regular patrols, as I have a strong feeling they'll need someone to come save themselves sooner or later. I'm going to head into town for a supply run. Radio me if there's anything out of the ordinary." Something in Hicks' voice was off. It was something I hadn't seen before: fear. Alone in the ranger cabin that evening, I heard the familiar crackle of static on the radio as the soft voice of Iris came over the line. "Ranger Station, this is Fire Watch Alpha. You awake?" A smile came across my face hearing the call as I radioed back, putting down my coffee. "This is Ranger Station. What's your status, Alpha?" "All quiet tonight, Ranger Station. The sky is clear, and you can see a beautiful view of Mercury from up here. You know, one of these times I'm going to have to come up and look through that telescope of yours and see what you see, Alpha." "Ranger Station, is that a proposition, because this is strictly a solo job up here?" "Well, when your assignment ends, then we'll have to meet in person." A giggle came across the radio. "I think we can do that. I'll bring my telescope and..." The line cut to static. "Alpha, I lost you for a second. You still there?" A static buzzed back. "Alpha, this is Ranger Station. Please respond." As only static greeted me. "Iris, are you okay up there?" When the radio came back on, I heard screaming and crying in the background as I shot up. Ranger Station, this is Alpha. I have an emergency. Please respond. Alpha, this is Ranger Station. What's going on up there? A girl just burst out of the woods to my tower screaming, hysterically covered in blood. You need to get over here now. Hold on, Iris. I'm coming. I grabbed my jacket and first aid kit and hopped into the Ranger truck, revving it at full speed up to the fire watch tower. The damn idiots, as Hicks called them, must have fallen or done something stupid and gotten hurt. After a tense drive that felt like an eternity, I arrived at the base of the tower and headed up the stairs to find Iris holding the girl Cammy I had met previously. Iris gestured to me to come as I rushed forward with my medic kit. What the hell happened here? I called out, examining the younger girl. Her right arm appeared shattered, hanging and jiggling from the skin and not bone. Slashes across her face and chest gushed blood as I pulled out gauze to hold the wounds closed. I don't know, Iris called out, trying to shout over the screaming girl. She ran out of the woods looking like this. As I tried to apply first aid, the girl was wailing and screaming, not from pain, but fear. Over and over she called out, it killed them. It killed them all. What killed who? I tried to ask as the girl flailed in Iris' arms. Her wounds got worse with each thrashing. I pulled out a sedative and injected it into her working arm, which slowly calmed the girl as Iris and I both sighed as the moment passed. Over the next half hour, we worked to apply what first aid we could. I radioed for a helicopter medevac, but they won't be here for at least an hour. I looked down at the poor girl, her body battered and broken. I also can't seem to get a hold of Ranger Hicks. Just what the hell is going on? Iris wiped off blood from her hands, but it seemed like a futile effort considering it was everywhere else on her. Jesus, what the hell happened to her? Given the slash marks and force trauma, it looks like a bear attack. But we haven't had any reports of one around here in months. Can you stay and look after her until the medevac arrives? I need to go look for her friends, as I'm guessing she was not the only one attacked. Iris nodded, the shock of it all setting in. Before you go, I need to tell you something. I was halfway out the door, but stopped and turned back around. The last few nights I've been seeing something in the dark move out there. I thought I was crazy, but it definitely has been walking around the tower like it was scoping it out. I didn't say anything as I had no proof, and the eyes play tricks, but after this, she trailed off looking at the bloody girl on the floor. I paused thinking of what to say, and nothing came, and just nodded like that was the solution. It's a bear. The marks and strength have to be one. Iris screamed and fell to her knees. It wasn't a goddamn bear. There's something out here in these woods. It looked at me, it was watching me, and it clearly got them too. Just wait for the medevac. The others out there likely need help. As I ran out down the stairs back to the truck, grabbing the rifle out of the back and heading the direction the girl Cammy was said to walk from. The forest was dense, and this would have to be an exploration on foot. The forest had never seemed darker, like the canopy above had wrapped itself over the world and blotted out all light above. Over and over I called out on the radio, Hicks, pick up. Hicks, pick up the goddamn radio, but was met only by silence. The heavy mag light illuminated my path forward as I followed a trail of blood left by Cammy. In the dark, the feeling of a forest path becomes almost infinitely liminal, feeling like you've traveled nowhere and for miles simultaneously. A stretch of blood on the ground led me to the telltale smell of wood burning, and I came to find a campsite. I immediately turned away in abject disgust upon entering the perimeter, as half a human torso was lying on the ground. It was mangled, but the face of Josh was barely attached to the head. Tents were ripped and torn, and at least one more body was lying prone with long claw marks raking its length with no sign of breath or life. Another was impaled on tree limbs above like it was thrown from the ground. Of the others I could see nothing. I pulled the rifle off my shoulder, feeling like it was the one thing of control I had in the moment, but I was nothing but terrified, and each step was labored to take moving forward. A twig snapped, and I turned to face the direction of the sound, gun noticeably shaking in my hands. Hello, I called out as if that was a great question in the situation. Is anyone there? From behind a tree a figure fell and thudded to the ground as I rushed over. In the light of my flashlight, the portly frame of Hicks was on the ground, bleeding from a large stab wound in his stomach. Oh hell, Hicks, what are you doing out here? As I pulled off my jacket, trying to place it on his wound, as he coughed up blood. I'm sorry, Parsons. I'm so sorry. I couldn't stop it. I followed them and tried to scare them off, but I couldn't stop them. Stop what, Hicks? As I saw the extent of his wound, which punched through seemingly to the other side. What happened? These idiots, they disturbed it. They awoke it before I could contain it. I tried to stop them, but I was too late. I can't believe they found it. I've spent all this time up here trying to keep it hidden, and I failed. Hicks, you're not making any sense. This forest is old, ancient old Parsons. A being lives here. It is primal wrath, and anger and violence coughing up more blood and trying desperately to point to something at the campsite. The sigil there, it sealed it, and they disturbed it just like the people before. He grabbed my shirt and pulled me forward. It's going to kill every human in this forest now that it is free. You need to get out of here. As a cloud of blood splattered out, and Hicks' breath stuttered to a halt as his eyes sank back with his body going limp. I think I held his lifeless body for a good 20 minutes before coming back into myself and finally laying him down on the ground. Finally standing up, I walked to the area Hicks had pointed to in his last moments. The ground was rough and torn with dirt, and leaves and sticks showered everywhere. Running my hands through the disturbed soil, a stone effigy of a face was buried in the ground. As I ran my hands over it, more of the stone carving presented itself. It was a carved face made of leaves. The visage was terrible and gave me revulsion upon viewing it. It cracked down the center as I tried to refocus on it, as something was pulling out of the cracks. I touched it and pulled my fingers into the light to see fresh red blood oozing from the ground, like the forest itself was bleeding. My examination stopped when I heard a scream in the distance and darted away from the campsite towards the sound. The scream I heard was human, and I heard the telltale whimpering of someone in pain. I pushed through the forest brush trying to make my way towards the sounds, and when I showed my light, I saw one of the young girls from the group before. She was bloodied and crying in agony. I shouldered my rifle and tried to come to her aid. "Hold on, I'm coming," I called out. The phrase reminded me to check if I still had any first aid supplies, and the moment of hesitation saved my life. Claws the length of my arm slashed out in front of me, slashing across my face as the girl had vanished, and I fell backwards trying to regain my balance. Looking back up, a form stared down at me, sharing the same look of the stone figure buried before. A face of leaves with eyes of burning ember shot out as if it peered into my very soul. The long bladed limbs slashed down at me as I rolled aside from the blow, grabbing my rifle and wildly firing upwards. I'm no marksman, and whether out of luck or skill, a shot hit its face, and the creature screamed an inhuman howl. I wasn't going to press my luck, and I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, dropping the rifle by accident, but I couldn't look back. I didn't know where I was running in the dark as I just pushed forward, my heart pumping to the extreme with only the flashlight shining ahead. I hit a tree as I ran and fell, tripping over myself, crashing into the dirt. Picking myself up, I found I was in a clearing, one I had never seen in the woods before. All along the perimeter, thick trees seemed to have grown to gargantuan proportions. On every tree there were faces, human faces that screamed in eternal agony encased in the bark of the massive trunks. There were hundreds, thousands of faces, all screaming to the empty darkness of the forest. Behind me I heard lumbering footsteps. As the creature had found me, it moved in the darkness of the trees. Wherever my light showed, it faded and appeared elsewhere. It made not words, but sounds that triggered something mnemonic in me, something in me from when the first mammals appeared on the planet. It was the sound of being hunted. With nothing left to fight with, I made my way through the trees with faces and into the deep forest yet again. Behind me, like a breath of death that clung to my neck, I could feel the creature's claws closing in on me. Then I heard it, the sound of rotors. Changing direction, I darted over brush and bramble, trying to get closer to the sounds. I heard my heart in my ears as I ran. With every step, the rustle of leaves came closer. I didn't even notice what had happened at first until I hit the ground. The adrenaline and shock kept me conscious before the searing pain of being cut across my back finally hit me. It was not just the pain of being cut open, of nerves and blood spraying forward. No, it was the feeling and violence, as if such a thing could be quantified, stabbing into me. Whatever the thing was wanted so hard for me not just to be cut, but to feel agony, and it succeeded. I fell and heard the rush of rotors and time seemed to stop for me. I was doomed now. I was so close to escape, and it was all for naught. The forest itself seemed to delight in my pain, as if the blood cascading from my back nourished the ground floor, succoring on the crimson ichor flowing from my body. My eyes blinked for a moment as suddenly the dark forest was illuminated. A flare, from where I could not see, but the last thing my conscious mind remembered was seeing a person standing, aiming a weapon at the thing behind me. My world faded into darkness. I awoke in a hospital bed, my sense of time lost. My body was bandaged to the point I looked like I was about to receive a royal burial in a pyramid. Over the next few days, I was interviewed by the local police, the FBI, and I'm sure half a dozen other agencies whose questions I could give no answer to. I had learned the medical crew had found the girl Cammy in the watch station badly beat up, but she appears to have survived, though in a near catatonic state. The other members of the Deep Woods podcast were either dead or missing. The news media had a feast at the story with wild speculation, but it was all chalked up to a bear attack as it had before. Of Iris there was no trace. The fire watcher was missing, along with the others presumed to have been gotten by the wild bear. A massive search and rescue was initiated, but no survivors were found. When I was well enough to walk, I went with a search party. Their gaze on me hoped I had some further secrets to reveal. I took them first to the bloody campground to search for the stone face of leaves buried in the ground, but it had disappeared. My fingers became bloody as I clawed into the dirt trying to find it, to no success. I then spent the next few weeks in the woods trying to find the clearing in the woods with the faces and trees. Every drone survey to guide said no such place existed. Eventually, I was deemed broken, mad even. My explanations became more evidence it was just a bear attack because of their objective absurdity. I had become nothing more than a joke, and the incident was slowly forgotten. I was in the woods yesterday, staring into the dark thicket, when I heard a voice. It was soft and calm, and I followed it. I followed it to a clearing I did not recognize, and in the center Iris stood. In her hand was an orange flare gun, and her clothes were ripped and torn. Her hair was wreathed in leaves, and her jaw was unhinged, and slash marks were down her body. She stared at me with burning ember eyes. She stared at me with the rage and wrath of the forest. This happened about a week ago and is the exact reason why I refuse to leave my room at night, or ever, if possible. I live in a 4-bedroom apartment. It's a 2-story apartment, and the second floor is kind of like its own little space. I have the entire upstairs to myself, so I have my bedroom and a game room. I've got a private bathroom as well, and I've got a mini fridge and a microwave, so I can live up there without ever going downstairs except to leave. The only exit in our apartment is at the bottom of the stairs. Me and my roommates are spiritual or religious in some way or another, so a lot of our decor is based on that. We have tarot card tapestries, dream catchers, things like that. We also have a Ouija board that sits on top of our bookshelf. My roommate Lila got the Ouija board from Authentic Witches in Colorado. Because of that, she said we were never to open the box, and if we did, the planchette and board had to be separated. I never really believed that, but out of respect for my roommate and friend, I never touched the board. Well, like I said, about a week ago, stuff went down. I went downstairs in the middle of the night to grab a snack. I was pulling an all-nighter to play a game that was just released, and I needed my gamer fuel. So I'm walking down the stairs and I look over the banister to see Lila sitting on the couch. The Ouija board is on the table in front of her. It's unopened, so I kind of figured it's her business. So I continue on with what I was doing. I turned to look at her and she was just staring, unblinkingly at the board. I got shivers, but this is kind of normal for her. Lila does weird stuff all the time. I went to the pantry to grab some chips and then to the fridge to grab a Monster. Core? Lila said. I turned around at the sound of my name. Lila was just staring at me, no expression on her face. Yeah? I asked. I stood still in the kitchen. Something about the way she looked at me made me freeze in my tracks. He needs you, she croaked. A chill ran down my spine. You need sleep, I managed to say to her. I trudged past her and back up the stairs. It wasn't until I was in my room with the door closed that I was able to relax. The hole downstairs was thick with some sort of energy. For good measure, I locked my door behind me. I put my headset on and went back to playing my game. When I went downstairs the next morning, Lila was still sitting on the couch with the Ouija board in front of her. Alice and Danny were standing next to her. What's up? I asked. Standing next to them to look at Lila, she was still just staring. Alice looked at me, dark circles clinging to her eyes. Lila was muttering to herself all night. She was so loud. How did you not hear? I shrugged sheepishly. I had my headset on, volume up to max. I looked over at Lila. She was like this when I came down last night too. She was being super creepy. Should we call 911? Danny asked. I sighed. There was no need to call 911. Maybe a priest, but not 911. I stepped over the small coffee table and grabbed Lila by the shoulders. I shook her aggressively. She snapped up to look at me and blinked a few times. She looked around confused. Good morning, Lila, I said. She stretched and cracked her shoulders. Did you guys move me? She asked genuinely. I looked over at Alice and Danny. Alice looked uncomfortable. You were like that all night, she said uneasily. Lila laughed. Sleepwalking, I guess. She stood up, stretched more, then put the Ouija board back on top of the bookshelf. The rest of the day went without incident, though Lila had no recollection of what happened the night previous. I went back to my game. I had more to do. That night, before starting a long quest line, I went to grab some more snacks to refill my fridge. I took off my headset and heard some muttering. It sounded like Lila. I sighed. She was being weird again. I unlocked and opened my door. From the landing, I could see clearly into the living room. Lila was sitting on the couch. The Ouija board was out of its box and sitting in her lap. A man was sitting crisscross on the table. He had his hands over hers on the planchette and was moving it around. Lila was crying softly and muttering what he was showing her. Vengeance, she muttered slowly. Core dead. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. I snapped the picture but fumbled trying to put it back in my pocket and dropped it. Both Lila and the man snapped to look at me. I snatched my phone and bolted into my room, closing and locking the door. I heard someone running up the stairs, then pounding on my door. I put my head between my knees and plugged my ears. I perked up at a notification on my phone. It was our roommate group chat. Alice, who the hell is making all that noise? Me. Lila is banging on my door. She won't leave me alone. I heard a door open downstairs and the banging stopped. I didn't dare open my door to investigate though. I stayed awake all night, not playing my game, but waiting with a knife in case something came in. Like I said, that was a week ago. I don't dare leave my room ever at night anymore. I only go downstairs to leave the apartment. Lila pretends everything is okay. It's like she doesn't even know what happened. The picture on my phone proves it though. I can't see the man clearly on it, but you can see his outline. It's obvious there's something there. Needless to say, I'm looking to move out, so if anyone wants a nice apartment with a mildly possessed roommate, let me know. I live in Hudson, Oregon, and sometimes, when they cut down a tree in my town, they find a body inside. I don't mean that they find bodies inside the hollows. I mean that the bodies are found completely encased within the wood of solid, whole trees. According to my grandpa, there were stories of bodies and trees going around Hudson since before he could remember. He thinks they started in the 1800s as old pioneer and settler stories, but they were just that, stories. No, the first confirmed instance didn't occur until the 70s. According to my dad, when he was about 11, he'd heard rumors that the Benson family had cut down a tree in their backyard, were chopping it up for firewood, and boom, bones and clothes in the middle of the logs. Donnie Fillmore told me it was like the wood had grown around the corpse. He remembers. Dad got unnerved. Dad told Grandpa, and Grandpa, a science enthusiast who didn't even raise his children to believe in Santa Claus, laughed and said those stories had been around forever. My dad was pretty shook up though, so Grandpa said that, if it would calm him down, he'd take him to the Bensons himself to prove that it was just the newest iteration of an old story. They went to the Bensons. It wasn't just a story. Nobody knew who it was. The Bensons found in the tree. Grandpa says some wacko in town even tried to persuade people the body had grown inside the tree, but everyone pointed out real soon that didn't explain the clothes. The reporters came to Hudson. Of course, Dad says he even remembers a news truck. There are some old newspaper articles about it from archives I was able to find online, but the news never really made it national. Grandpa says it got drowned out by Watergate. They buried the remains in an unmarked plot in the local cemetery, and for years people joked that if someone was running late to a meeting, they'd been caught by a tree. The second body they found is much better documented. In fact, you may have heard about it yourself. In 1987, a landscaping company hired by Westford Construction was clearing out some forest land for homes. The landscaping company, whose name I haven't been able to find, it may have been off the books, illegal immigrant labor, decided to mitigate cost of labor by selling felled trees to Gerstein Lumber, a local timber processing plant. Guess what they found in one of the trees? Body found within tree. Sandra Tyson. Portland Times, March 29, 1987. Hudson, or a lumber processing plant, was shocked on Monday to discover the remains of a missing woman encased within the wood of one of the trees it was processing. Hector Torres, a supervisor at the Gerstein Lumber Processing Plant, informed authorities that workers had found clothes and human bones within some timber that the plant was in the process of preparing for sale. Local authorities have identified the body as Helen Fields, a Hudson woman who was reported missing in 1974. Robert and Cassandra Fields, the parents of the missing woman, say that while they are at peace now that their daughter has been found, they want to know what happened to her and how her body came to be encased within a tree. Fields' remains will be laid to rest with a memorial service at the Hudson City Cemetery on Saturday. You can still find some other articles about the incident online from newspaper archives, though it's most frequently talked about in publications about mysteries and urban legends. Of course, the article doesn't tell you that they'd already cut up the tree when they found the body. I've called Mr. Torres myself, who told me they didn't notice anything strange until the machinery started making funny noises during the cutting, and that they had to hand over 4 different slabs of wood to the police. Also, the article seems to imply that either the body was intact enough to identify or that they did some sort of DNA testing. From what a retired cop told me, they were only able to ID the body because they found a Sears name tag encased in the wood with the name Helen on it, and Helen Fields had been working for the local Sears at the time of her disappearance. Also, again from what I can tell, the news never really reached a national scale. Dad says it got drowned out by the Iran-Contra scandal. From what I've been able to find, there weren't any incidents after 1987 at least. none that were reported. During the 80 seconds, Hudson had been touted as the next Portland. The city was planning to expand as much as it could, cutting into the forest land to build homes and stores. But while the rest of America's economy boomed, for some reason Hudson's failed, and the plans for expansion were scrapped. In fact, I haven't been able to find evidence that any more forest land in Hudson has been cleared since 1987. As you could have probably guessed, I've done my research about this Hudson phenomenon. I'd heard the stories a time or two growing up. They weren't any sort of hush town secret, nor were they any sort of oft-told, important part of the town's heritage. More than anything, they were just things that had happened, and everyone in town, busy with their own lives, had simply moved on. They were the kinds of stories that you forgot for years at a time, and when you were at a party or a hangout, and one of your friends mentioned them, you'd feel a light turn on in your head and you'd remember them, and you might even have a spooky conversation for half an hour or so before the topic changed again and you'd talk about something else. Heck, the stories might even linger in your mind for a couple of days, but work and relationships and bills and new gossip pushed them to the back of your mind for another several years, until someone else at another party mentions them again. So let me tell you when the stories became more than just stories to me. Last year, I was at my friend Eddie's apartment. His full name was Edgar, a secret few knew and fewer could tell without him knocking their teeth out. It had been a rough day for Eddie. His girlfriend of 4 years had packed up her things in the apartment and left without so much as a note, even changing her cell number. Eddie had had a few beers, and I was trying to talk him through things. He wasn't listening too much. He just sort of sat there with his eyes unfocused, and, in spite of the beers, was more fidgety than ever. I remember Judge Judy was on the TV in the background. We'd been there for about half an hour when, suddenly, Eddie got up. "Just a sec," he said, heading to his bedroom, and emerging about a minute later with an axe. "Dude," I said cautiously. "You can keep talking," he said, and, resolutely, he marched straight out the front door. I followed him. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. He didn't even act like I was there. It was getting dark. We walked out of the neighborhood and into the nearby grove of trees. I had my phone in my pocket, ready to call somebody, even the police, in case my friend was about to do something he'd regret. Finally, when we were far enough into the grove that we couldn't hear the rush of cars from the freeway, Eddie stopped at a tree. He looked at it, sizing it up for a moment, and quicker than I thought him capable, he swung the axe into the tree with a resounding thwack. "Dude," I said again. "I'm still listening," he said. I hadn't said anything in 10 minutes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Clearing my mind," he said. After a moment he stopped, looked around, and pointed a bit farther into the grove, and there, about 50 yards out, I saw a felled tree lying on the ground. This was evidently not the first tree that Eddie had taken his anger out on. He'd always been a wall puncher in high school, and I guessed his coping mechanisms had evolved into more aggressive vandalism that, if you were careful, you didn't have to pay for damaging. I should have told him to stop, but he was whacking away at the tree like it had killed his sister. His teeth were gritted. I don't think he was drunk enough to hurt anyone, but he might have been tipsy enough to hurt himself. He thwacked and thwacked again, a few chips flying from the tree here and there. Then, he let out a guttural yell as he dealt the tree a particularly vicious blow. The axe got stuck in the tree with a sickening thud, and with some effort, Eddie pulled it out again. "Stop," I yelled, and, surprisingly, Eddie actually stopped. "What?" he said impatiently. "Look," I said, pointing at the blade of the axe. The blade was spattered with dark, red liquid. I hadn't seen a whole lot of blood in greater quantities than when you cut yourself shaving. For a second, my brain didn't even register that the liquid might have been blood. We looked at the tree, and from the most recent blow, dark ichor was now oozing down the bark. The stories all came rushing back to the forefront of my mind. We both looked at each other. For a moment, we didn't say anything. Eddie looked absolutely stunned. Then, Eddie swung the axe into the tree again. But this time it was not a passionate blow. It was calculated, or at least as calculated as a semi-inebriated Eddie could manage. I remember his face, no longer contorted in anger. It was the face of morbid curiosity. Eddie swung again, but swore after announcing that he'd missed his mark. He tried again and swore again, and I, seized myself by the same morbid curiosity, convinced Eddie to let me try. I chipped away lightly at the wood around the bleeding cut. The axe proved too clumsy an instrument for the job, so Eddie went back to his apartment and fetched a hatchet and a pocket knife, and I got to work. I carved and pulled away wood, all the time wondering if I was really going to find a body, and soon, after peeling away a chunk of wood, I saw it, a strip of blood-soaked denim. We had reached a leg. We kept at it. We should have called the cops right then. But we didn't. The thought didn't even cross my mind, and I doubt it would have ever crossed Eddie's. Over the course of an hour, we carved out the left side of the body, whittling and pulling away strips of wood as we made our way up the leg, hip, and all the way up to the abdomen, where we hit the blue, shredded fabric of a dress shirt. I was expecting the body to be far more decomposed, but no, as long as I was careful, I didn't pierce any of the pale, bloated flesh, though the jeans, which were stained with blood in places Eddie definitely hadn't hit with the axe, kept getting caught in the blade. Though I was fine working away the wood, I couldn't bring myself to touch the body itself anywhere. The smell was horrible. I can't even begin to describe it, as I'd never smelled anything like it before and have not smelled anything like it again. As I worked, Eddie remained silent, only handing me the tools I asked for. It got darker and darker, and Eddie had to use the light of his cell phone so I could see what I was doing. I didn't carve away too much, so that most of the body remained upright within the tree, though when I had started out I was dumb enough to carve the leg out so much that it dangled and, were it more decomposed, might have threatened to fall out while leaving the rest of the body in tree. We carved our way up the body until the form of the chest, shoulders, and neck were all visible. Then we got to the face. I worked the wood away and a man's face was slowly revealed, though several strips of skin were pulled off with the wood. The eyes were closed, the nose looked like it had been crushed, and as I worked my way downward I realized that the mouth was open. I had to use my pocket knife to pry the wood out of the body's open mouth. It took several minutes and lots of wiggling, but I finally managed to yank it out, though several of his teeth came with it. For the first time, I stood back to look at my grim handiwork. There, in front of me, was the body of a fellow human being, his face frozen eternally in a scream. I don't know whether the adrenaline had worn off, or if I just hadn't taken the time to really think, but the actual horror of the situation finally hit me. My knees felt weak, and I had to lean against the tree. Eddie just stood there, silent. As I looked over the body, I noticed that we hadn't uncovered an arm, and as I scanned the shape of the shoulder, I realized that the arm must still be in the tree, stretching upward to where we hadn't carved yet. Whoever this man was, he had died with his arm reaching upward. That's when we called the cops. They showed up after about 20 minutes and roped off the area, though who would be coming into the middle of the forest was beyond me. We told them our story, and I know they smelled the booze on Eddie's breath, so I did most of the talking. As they took photographs of the tree and started prying out the rest of the body, one of the younger cops went on a power trip, saying we should have called them immediately after finding the body and shouldn't have interfered so much with it. In fact, he might even charge us with vandalism of public property. We were let off the hook, however, after one of the older cops subtly told him to relax. They made some half-hearted attempts to tell us to go home, but we stuck around long enough to watch them finish pulling the rest of the remains out of the tree. They had to do it in pieces. I kept calling the cops over the next few days, asking for updates. During that time, I researched bodies in trees online, talked to my family, and made phone calls around town, which is how I found all the information I've already shared. When I called the cops about a week later, they finally told me that they had identified the body as Jim Peters, a 43-year-old real estate agent who had gone missing a month before. Just 1 month. I pointed out that even if the tree could have grown around the corpse, it would have taken years for it to grow around the body as much as it had. The cops didn't have anything to say about that. The mystery didn't end there, though. Jim Peters was not from Hudson. He had gone missing from Phoenix, Arizona, but it was definitely Jim Peters. They did DNA testing and everything. Nobody had any answers as to how a guy from Arizona had ended up dead inside a tree in Hudson, Oregon. A few days later, Eddie knocked on my door. He looked a little rough around the edges, dirty jeans and flannel shirt, bags under his eyes, unshaven, but he was sober. He smelled like a campfire. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Around," he said vaguely. We sat on the step outside my apartment and talked while Eddie lit a cigarette. "Crazy, we just happened to hit the tree with a person in it," I eventually said. Eddie scoffed. "Wasn't luck," he said, taking a deep drag. "So what?" I said. "It was fate." "No," he said. It was just pretty much guaranteed to happen. What do you mean? I mean that of course we were going to knock one down with a body in it, he said. Don't you get it? No, I had to admit. We knocked down a tree with a body in it, he said, because they all have bodies inside them. I was stunned. How do you know? Well, maybe not all of them, he allowed. But lots of them. Eddie, I said slowly, how do you know that? For a long time, he didn't say anything, just smoked. I knew better than to prod, so I let him sit in silence until he was ready to talk. Eventually, I checked my phone. He'd been silent for 8 minutes straight. He even put out his cigarette on the cement and lit another one. I gotta go, he finally said, getting up. I almost tried to stop him, but it was Eddie. That would have been pointless. About 2 weeks later, Eddie's parents called me. He hadn't answered his phone in 6 days. Last time we talked with him, they said, he said he was on his way to see you. I'll try and get a hold of him, I said. But it's probably just Eddie being Eddie. I tried calling Eddie. He didn't answer. I drove down to his apartment and knocked on the door. Nobody answered. So I grabbed the key I knew he kept under the mat, unlocked the door, and walked in. All of his stuff was there, but Eddie was nowhere to be seen. I called the cops and reported him missing before calling his parents. After I was finished, I drove back to my apartment, parked my car, and for the first time in years, I cried. I sat there and cried. After about half an hour, I finally wiped my eyes and got out of my car. I locked the doors, got out, made my way onto the sidewalk, began crossing the apartment courtyard, and almost fell down. There, in the middle of the courtyard's grass, and where there definitely hadn't been one before, was a fully grown elm tree. I'm currently in the process of moving to Indiana. I'm leaving Hudson in a few days, and twice, in the middle of the night, I've gone down to the elm tree, carrying my own axe, but I just don't have it in me to confirm for myself that Eddie isn't there.